Hi, my name is Clay Tumey, and I am an ambassador for Enneagram Prison Project. Today is April 12th, 2022, and today we celebrate 10 years of EPP. During these past 12 months, I've had the opportunity to sit down and have a talk with many of the people who've had a major impact along the way with EPP. If you've been following along, you know by now that 14 episodes simply isn't enough to talk to every person that we'd like to hear from. And to that, I'm happy to say again that the podcast will be returning for a second season, and that should kick off early next month. More details on that later. For today's episode, I travel once again to California and sit down for a chat with the founder of EPP, Susan Olesek, and her partner and executive director of the project, Rick Olesek. Fair warning if you didn't already notice, this is a long episode. Susan, Rick, and I looked back at some key moments in this first decade of EPP, and we didn't want to limit ourselves by trying to squeeze it all into 1 hour or even 2. Thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us as we celebrate 10 years of Enneagram Prison Project. Oh, you have the names of who was there?
Isn't that helpful?
Well, I have some of the names of people, just because I had...
Uranio, that was Burlingame, right?
Yeah, the Uranio one was the one...
With Alex.
With Alex, yeah.
That's the one where all the good pictures are from.
Well, I just figured I would put in there some of the notes. The one thing, the interesting one about the one in Fort Lauderdale was I think that was the first time you presented. And then right on the back of the Fort Lauderdale one, she went and presented at EANT in Asilomar, and if I remember, there's a really lovely picture in a like thing they did in 2011 where there's a picture of you and David kind of sitting there, and I've always thought to try to snap that picture. It's on YouTube, and just kind of crop it out because it's a nice picture of the two of them.
So Fort Lauderdale in 2011, is that when you went on the news?
It's also when she went on the news. Yeah,
was that separate for you and David both? On there, right? What was that like?
That was a trip.
Yeah. I've been on the news before too, but yours is way not as fun, probably.
The news was with my high school best friend from 7th grade in Hong Kong, Shannon Cake, who is a reporter there in South Florida. And I was going to be in town, and I was like, hey, Shannon. And then we cooked it up, and she went way, way overboard to accommodate and produce such a special episode. And that was, David was adorable, and he was really in his element.
Did you contact her and you're like, hey, I want to be on the news where you work? Or did she just know you were in town, and how did that all come about?
I don't actually remember. Kind of like I just told you that she was in town. Yeah. I was in town, in her town, and I had never met her kids or her husband or anything. So I had one night where I got to see her, and then she didn't know what the Enneagram really was. Turns out, I think she picked that week that she related to 3, and it was just amazing to watch her work in her business, what she was up to, and putting on her makeup and the whole thing. And I remember it was 150 degrees and like practically raining. It was so hot, and David and I showed up, and we were trying to look nice, but we were like stuck to our shirts. And he showed up a little later, and he was so giddy, like he hadn't done something quite like that before. Of course I hadn't either, but I just trusted David so much, and I was terrified of just saying the wrong thing about the Enneagram, and he just came to life, and then it made it all okay. She really brought out the best in him.
Who is Dr. David Daniels?
Well, David is so many things to so many people. To me, David was one of my first teachers. He was a mentor. He became a colleague. He invited me into so many places in myself. But really, everyone ought to know that David is one of the major developers of the Enneagram.
When did you... That was in... when?
Here we go. With the dates.
Did you look these up, Rick? By the way, we should do the official start. The point of the podcast is to tell the story of EPP and the first 10 years that we're now celebrating coming up soon. Today is April the 12th, which is not today, but it's going to be today when other people hear this. So it's 10 years of EPP. And there was some time before that we could talk about. And then there's a lot of time in the last 10 years to talk about. And typically the podcast is me having the opportunity to chat with another person who's had an impact along the way. And today I get to talk to two people who've both had impacts. We're just going to go ahead and understate that real quick along the way. So who am I talking to in whichever order that I don't know if y'all drew straws or flipped a coin, but who am I talking to today?
Well, I'm Rick Olesek, and I'm the executive director for Enneagram Prison Project. And I have, I'm really excited to be talking and be joined with Susan, who, of course, is the founder of Enneagram Prison Project, and she can introduce herself.
Also had an impact.
And being joined with Susan in more ways than one, I think it's really fitting that we're sitting here on our love seat. Let the record show. I suggested the love seat. And I am the founder, of course, and also a guide, a board member, and I fill in where I can. Lots of things at EPP.
What is it like to just be able to say the cool sentence of "I am the founder of ... and then a cool thing like EPP? Does that feel like anything to you?
It feels like a lot at this point, honestly. And I don't use the word proud very often, but I am proud of who we are and where we've come from and all that we've put in motion, all that we've co-created together.
And we can start anywhere. We can go in any order that you want. We have a list of all, like some bullet points that help us chronologically. But I'm curious, was there a situation or an instance that gave birth to EPP? Was it a gradual, like over the course of an X amount of time, years or whatever? Like where did this come from?
I want you to talk about Megatron.
Megatron? I'm happy. We can go there. That's actually towards the
yeah. I mean, I think
that's
there
the
are a lot
BC of EPP.
I was thinking there are places to start, like when I met David and those places where I was first, of course, learning the Enneagram inside of myself. But it has to start in prison, where it really did start, and that was when I had just barely certified to teach the Enneagram. I was teaching one class in my living room and one in my local church, and I got invited to teach at a prison entrepreneurship program and in Texas, and I said yes right away, but I really had no idea what I was saying yes to. But I did, and I've told this story many times. I showed up and I stressed myself like crazy just to get there, and then when I got there, I was just absolutely blown away by the humanity in the room. The people in the room were so excited that I was there, so welcoming, put me at ease, and were so happy to learn about themselves. And just being received with so much appreciation, adoration, and people I didn't even know. And that was the beginning of my own personal prison, because I didn't feel that way about me, and I didn't know what to do with people who received me in that way. And vice versa was totally true. All I could see was the light in the room and a bunch of people who didn't feel that way about themselves. And there we were, each other's perfect mirrors.
So what's so stressful about knowing that you're going to prison? It's a little different, I suppose, when you haven't broken a law to know that you're headed there. What were you stressed out about? Or why was it stressful? I
think the most stressful thing for me at the time, and still to this day, can be just going into the unknown, not having a plan, not knowing. Is it going to be, am I going to be okay? And in the absence of a plan, and in the absence of a guarantee that it's going to be okay, when I'm not really grounded, I fill in with all the worst possible things that they might think about me, I might do to them, that kind of stuff.
Do you remember when she was telling you about this idea to go to Texas and go into prison and teach this stuff?
I do remember about it. I mean, it was a big deal, right? It's a big deal for Susan had already gone and certified in the narrative and then certified with EI, and she was wanting to teach, but now all of a sudden she's, catching a plane to Houston to go into, a prison. And I remember, but I don't think that, I think it was just kind of a foregone conclusion that that was going to happen. And that as soon as she was like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, I was like, great, that sounds great. and I don't think I really understood all the pieces that were, all the things that were in motion at that point.
Part of what I usually say before we start recording, and I'll just say it here, is that at any point, it's not like question, answer. So it can go this way too, if y'all have any thoughts to share, or even memories that you fill in each other's,
Well, I'll say
on.
here in this place that I wasn't actually certified with Enneagram Institute at the time. As soon as I finished my certification with EANT, is what it was called at the time, I immediately signed up to start taking courses at Enneagram Institute because I felt so unsure of myself and my own knowledge and my own self. And so I don't know if you know this, but after my first time I went to Texas, then I got invited back. And I think it was the second time or the third time, because they were recording the whole sessions, I had to produce a video for Enneagram Institute. So I used the video that I had in Texas to send to them.
It's part of your teaching?
It was part of my certification.
I didn't know that.
Wow, something Clay didn't know.
I don't remember that at all.
I totally remember that because the feedback
I knew we were recording because we recorded everything
right
there.
And I really wanted, how hard it is to record yourself as a new teacher. Whoever can do that, especially, all those years ago. So it was really helpful on a practical level. But I remember it because, of course, it was a unique way to submit for certification. But I remember the feedback I got was, you spoke so fast, I don't even know if they could understand you. And I heard myself and I thought, God, what did I say? It was that's how my nerves came out.
So the feedback was after you submitted it for certification, the group that was certifying you or not, did they certify you like right off the bat, or did you have to resubmit and do? Oh
no, they got me right off the bat.
There's a fair chance that you teaching the Enneagram in prison, that video that you had, there's a fair chance that that's the first time that ever happened. You think so?
Teaching the Enneagram in prison?
Yeah.
Well,
like the video recording of that is probably the first time that's ever been done.
Unless Kat has that recording. We've heard, she did all kinds of stuff there.
Yeah. And Kat that was your connection in PEP.
Yeah.
She was the founder.
Catherine Rourke.
Wait,
now
did I say
Catherine
EPP
Hook.
or PPP? This is why I say entrepreneurship program instead of PEP, because I get confused. I think I said EPP. I actually think, I don't know. Okay.
PEP, EPP,
yeah,
yes.
PEP, EPP.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you know me.
Well, I think, I always give props to Kat because she had that idea to bring the Enneagram into a very interesting application. And she was already doing such amazing work with men, doing business for good, turning people who had, I can't do her soundbite, but who had street hustle to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah. The people, I think what a lot of people might not always realize at a glance is that the people who succeed in crime are very often very, very similar to the people who succeed in business in general. It just so happens that one of them is not allowed. And so people who, run like drug organizations or other kind of criminal activity they're like organizations and they're illegal and they're not okay. I'm not like justifying it, but that skill set is very useful when you come out. And, not doing a pitch for them at all, but I'll just say that when you get out of prison, it's hard to find work. And your best bet oftentimes is to either find, knuckle busting work, blue collar stuff that's not very fun, or go into business for yourself if you don't have connections. And so that's what that program was around, was learning how to get out and hopefully starting your own business so that you didn't have to pass a background check somewhere else. And part of the program, it was a 6-month curriculum. And part of that program, one of the weeks, 2 of the weeks, but one of the weeks very early on, we did a character assessment. And it was like a 360 review where your peers and other people give you feedback on how you are as a person and all these other things. And then the week after that is when they brought in who we called the Enneagram lady. And that's when we started learning about personality types. And, the character assessment was very, it was painful. And it was, in my opinion, a very healthy, like deconstructive kind of a thing. And then all these questions show up in our minds and our lives. Like we thought we were good, but we're really struggling.
Can you speak to just specifically the character assessment? What happened for you? Because that is really relevant. It was like a primer for how you receive the Enneagram, I think, Clay.
100%. I don't think that I would have been open to hearing you, frankly. And that's all on me, because what the character assessment did for me, by that point, I was in my 3rd year of incarceration, and I'd already been doing what I thought was working on myself. And it's unfair to say that I was doing nothing, but I was doing something. I just wasn't achieving the level of development that I thought I had been. And I didn't know anything about the Enneagram. I just knew that, like, I'm a better guy today than I was when before I got locked up. And so all these patterns that had been in my life of being a know-it-all, being like a jerk and arrogant, condescending, jackass, all these things that are, some people would argue are still here, by the way. But I was very proud at that time that I had, quote unquote, gotten over it, and that I was no longer this person that I was for the first 30 years of my life. And then the character assessment showed me otherwise. And I don't know how I was so blind to...
What did the character assessment show?
Yeah, they literally fill out a form. And by they, I mean my peers, my classmates, the graduates that are still there. It's about 150 people. And part of it is literally just going through this list of adjectives and saying what they think you are, both good and bad. He's condescending. He's helpful. He's very wise, very rude, and there's no limit to either.
The range.
Yeah, it's all there. And if the word that you want ain't there, you can write it down.
So what was your biggest takeaway from that?
I was still arrogant. I was still condescending. I was still a know-it-all. I was still rude to people. I was still very abrasive in how I went about things. And yeah, I did know a lot, and I was very informed. And I was the guy that a lot of people went to if they needed help, but not necessarily the guy that they went to if they needed a friend. And it totally took my self-image that I had of myself and I just threw it out the window. So I all these things that I thought I had worked on, all those words that I just listed, I tricked myself somehow to thinking that I was beyond them. And it just wasn't the case. I was still all of those.
And so perfect case in point. So you were my mirror, because I had a whole set of other adjectives that I felt about myself, and I had a different cover that I was operating under. And that's obviously what personality is. And to go back to David for a second, he was so excited that I was going to prison. And he was adorable about it. And we were working on, I was on the planning committee for the EANT conference, which was happening in Asilomar around that time, 2011.
Yeah.
So I had just certified in 2009, and that's around that time I remember working a lot with David. And he said to me, "Don't teach in prison any different than you teach in the church." And that always stayed with me, the way he said that. And I think instinctively, that is how I want to teach. And I also felt like David knew how valuable and how precious an audience I was about to be in front of. And yeah.
Do you want to talk quickly about Megatron? You brought up Megatron earlier. Do you want now?
Well, I just think that the Megatron thing, if you, Susan, you're such a great writer. And I remember you writing those blogs, and we were just talking about those earlier today, and the blogs from when you first went into prison. And the one of them was, the second or third blog, if I remember correctly, second blog was about Megatron and how you had been named Megatron, which, I'll let you tell the story. So
Well, I thought one of the cool things about working with those guys, and I think this also, just shout out to Kat who came up with this idea, was that everyone had a sweet name. And so people were, what was your sweet name, Clay?
We've already mentioned that on a previous episode. Go find it. Okay, I'll tell you. It's pumpkin pie.
That's right. That's right.
I just got the stare of Megatron.
It's just a question.
Pumpkin pie, I know.
Yeah.
Pumpkin pie.
I mean, pumpkin pie, right? And most people have street names, so it's obviously turning that whole thing on its head. And people would introduce themselves with their name and their sweet name, and often a funny little movement or motion that went along with it. And I just thought it was so endearing, and it was quite I was unsuspecting. I think it was the second or third time.
It was my class. It was the second one. I remember it crystal clear. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll tell you how I received it. Why don't you set it up and say how it came to be? What happened?
So, the sweet name is literally just a sweeter version of the street name idea. And I think you nailed all that. And the way we would go about giving each other sweet names, like as a class. So it wouldn't be like one person saying, oh, you're Taffy, Laffy Taffy, or whatever, it would be in front of the class. And it would be like a collective effort. So with the guys, and we would do this with guests too. So it was a business program. A lot of executives would come in as guests, and we would have events and all kinds of cool stuff. And we would give our guests sweet names as well. With women, they got tough names. So the men got sweet names and the women got tough names. And the process was the same. We would ask you a few questions, and by we, it'd be whoever the MC was, that day, one of the guys in class. Ask you a few questions. Sometimes it's obvious. So like for me, I got a big head, so I probably got pumpkin pie just literally because of my pumpkin on top of my shoulders, So there was no sweet name interview for me. But so the questions and this and that and the other, and this was also after having taught. This was towards the end of the weekend after you had already taught the types. It was different back then. It was like a 12-hour crash course. It wasn't like a
16 hours, 2 straight days.
Yeah, it was a Friday and a Saturday, and then towards the end of that, there was like a little bit of a party where we had like music, and it was kind of rowdy and just fun. Yeah, and so that's when we it was the MC's name was Faust, and Faust was just asking you a few questions, throwing out, anybody have any suggestions, this, that, and the other. And Megatron is a character from Transformers, and it's a very and the way that you wrote about this in your blog, I wish I had that in front of me, because it's one of my favorite stories to have read. And so we decided on Megatron. So you're Susan Olesek, aka Megatron.
The
right?
Egomaniacal transformer. That's what really stuck with me. And I felt like, damn, I've arrived. I'm one of the guys. I'm one of them.
Got yourself a prison name.
Yeah.
Right. I just thought that egomaniacal transformer was the funniest thing ever.
Yeah.
So clever.
It was so clever.
Yeah. And that's when you really got a good nickname. And the lady who was head of, I think she had many titles, HR and all these other things that in the program, we called her Mimi, but she also had a she was like a grandmother to us. She brought cookies in and stuff, but we called her Sergeant Slaughter. That was her tough name. So there was some good, the women got all the best names. Like I'm Pumpkin Pie, and I could never have a cool name like Megatron. So. Well,
I grew up with a sister nicknamed Princess Queen, and I was Bugface. So I thought Egomaniacal Transformer really floated my boat.
For the record, I like Megatron better than Bugface. And I promise to only call you Megatron if I don't call you Susan. It turned into
Bug. But that whole beginning of the journey really propelled me into just so much passion for what was possible, conviction for how it could be done. And I loved my experience. I looked forward to it. I had 3 little kids. It was a big stretch to go every single time. I did that for years, and then it stopped abruptly.
Yeah.
And that was a really important thing. It was a big moment to not be able to go anymore. And they changed their mind, changed their program. And I kind of got, I got eliminated, or I don't know. I didn't even have the adjective for it. And I think it forced me to do something inside because I knew this was a calling. I knew this was something I was going to do forever. And I had to figure out a different gig. So I remember trying to figure out how I was going to get into a different jail or institution around here. And I talked about it for a long time. And then finally, somebody just said, why don't you just what are the places around you? And I Googled jails and prisons, and there was one 22.2 miles from my house. And I think those numbers can be a sign of the angels. And I thought, well, that must be my jail. That must be my spot. And that was Elmwood Correctional Facility.
I want to say how I remember this in my head, and you tell me if this is fair or accurate or anything. I remember exactly where I was when I found out that PEP had stopped using the Enneagram. They switched over to Myers-Briggs or whatever that's called. And I was, I was so pissed. I actually called the office, the PEP office, and I was like, what the hell? My mom listens, so I got to edit myself in real time.
Just going to have to beep it later, Clay.
Yeah. What the like, what, why? Like that was, and, so I got out in 2010, and then I think you taught through 2011, and then early 2012 is when they said, never mind, basically. And nothing happened. It wasn't like, just for the record, it's not like you did something, then they're like, well, we don't know about, we'll get some other Enneagram teacher in here. It was like, no, not no to you, no to the Enneagram. And we're going to do this business thing now, which is what Myers-Briggs is, I think. And they were not open to reconsidering that at all. And I was so angry. I was so pissed because the value that the Enneagram has to me as a tool, as an inmate, knowing that I'm about to get out, is immeasurable. And I thought, you just f***ed hundreds of men who are coming through your program. Or
they opened the door
exactly.
for thousands more.
Which is the second part of what I'm saying. And then now, 10 years later, I can say, damn, maybe that was like the thing that said, do something bigger. Do something that'll touch more lives, and not just men, and not just incarcerated people. So that's my story that I remember it as now. And is that fair, or is that?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I feel like I took the experience with me, and I also took the stories of some of the men, and they were very generous with me all throughout. They allowed me to write to them and to ask them more about their stories. I presented at, I guess that was Long Beach.
That's the one that I think Lance was saying that Diane went to.
That's the one.
And he didn't go? And
also Asilomar. And I was able to have screenshots from the videos that they let me take. They audio tape and videotape my as we talked about, my teaching. And I got to tell the stories of the people who had really blown my mind with what is possible with the tool. And that was so important. So I feel like I just honor that program and everything it opened up in me. It was never my idea to teach the Enneagram in prison, but I sure got a lot out of the invitation.
That's one of the things that I took away from the first time that we chatted on this podcast on episode 2 or 3. I think it was 3, wasn't it? Where I asked, like, you it wasn't that you just had this calling to prison. Then it was that the prison was basically saying, hey, want to come hang out?
I haven't had a calling to prison. I have always been, very true to type, on a mission for something. And I used to say to save the world, but it sounds so...
It's a lot of world.
Yeah, it's a lot of ego. But I've wanted to have a purpose. I wanted to do something purposeful. So I am not surprised that I ended up there.
So catching, we don't have to go chronologically, but there's certain points that I want to hit. And the next point, I think, is April 12th of 2012, which is a very significant day. Obviously, that's what here we are on April 12th, 10 years later. What exactly happened, Rick, on April 12th that we're celebrating?
Well, it's such a funny thing to be celebrating because, on April 11th, Susan, submitted the corporate paperwork to the state, and it was stamped on April 12th. So at that point, there was this, this paperwork that was stamped by the state that's like, hey, this is Enneagram Prison Project. It's actually the Enneagram Prison Project. And then the next set of things to happen, Susan had to go, and after the corporate paperwork was done, to figure out how to turn it into a 501c3. And that took a couple years for her to do that.
So on that day when they stamped it and you got notification that they had done their thing, was that just like another normal day, like, oh, that was cool, or was that grounds for celebration at that point?
I think it was pretty oh my God, we did it. We just did this thing. And I don't think it was an easy process. Also wasn't like a super hard process. I had a attorney who did a lot of pro bono help for me to get it filed. I remember driving to his office in Palo Alto and not knowing what the hell. I didn't know how to answer a lot of these questions. And so much of that, Rick just had a lot of just practical business know-how, and it wasn't at all I was doing it by myself. And there was a lot of understanding of how that kind of stuff might work.
Yeah.
And then we really kind of said, we're going, we're doing it.
Somebody's wondering what kind of questions were they? Like, what's so hard to answer with the legal stuff?
Well, the hard part, I think, as you're going through a 501c3 application is trying to define what it is that you're going to be doing as a nonprofit before you're doing it.
And so all the way back to whatever said, what exactly do you do here? Well, we didn't know.
What would you say you do here?
But and the funny part about that is that once it's filed and once you submit it, then you have to wait.
Yeah.
And it was like 2 years as we were waiting.
I was waiting. And then I remember coming back from, filing, that's one thing, we get the name, and then waiting for the 501c3 tax exempt status from the IRS is a whole nother thing. So I remember getting that right after the IEA conference in Denver, I didn't meet you, but where I brought you.
Where they met me.
Yeah, everybody else met you. And I remember wishing we had that status before we got there, and then getting a $1,000 donation check after our presentation and carrying that thing around with me, wondering, what am I going to do with this? And came home and got the status and got a bank account and finally deposited that guy.
Yeah. What was Denver all about? What happened there that was such a big deal? I can answer this question for myself, but I'm curious what your memories are of that.
Was that 2014? Is that what that's
2013.
2013? Yeah. 2013. I know for me, it was because all the conferences up until that point, Susan would just go, and I would take care of the kids, and Susan would go to the conferences.
And you were still working. You weren't the executive director.
Right. No, I was not the executive director. I was still working, but Denver was like the first time that I actually went. I think that's the first time that I went too. And so for me, it was interesting because Susan's sister lives in outside of Denver, and so we would we got a chance to see them, but it was like up on stage, Susan and Clay and Elam, and yeah, there's more here for Susan to talk about. I don't want to.
Well, a couple of things led up to Denver for me. One, I had presented a couple different times, co-presented, and I knew that the conference was a big deal. I don't think anything rivals the important part, which is that I was bringing two people that I had worked with in prison who were no longer in prison, who were working with the Enneagram in their lives. And that the idea of what I had was a reality. I said, let's go to Denver. And so here we are. So Clay, I think I'll start with you. And I'd like to just know, how are we for time? I'd like to know if you could tell us, how is it that you identified yourself as a 5?
Well,
that's the big thing that I think happened. And it was happening, but it was something that other people got to experience. And leading up to that, it was so important to me to have a film of some kind that would sort of tie this together, because I think media like that is so compelling. And I had gone back to Texas, where you and Elam and another person from the program were living, and we set up a time to do a film shoot, and it was an afternoon in Joey's house, and Joey was just such a magician, such a beautiful filmmaker. So we did the shoot. It was eventful, and we came back, and I remember getting the film while we were in the hotel, pretty much. Like we had not seen it, or we had just seen it. You had
while
not.
we were in the hotel in Denver.
In Denver,
Yeah.
but you had not seen it, but we had just received it from its final edits.
Hot off the press.
Hot off the press.
And it was literally going to be played in your
presentation.
In your presentation, yeah.
And I remember standing in the hotel room, and you literally just rolled off the plane. Elam was there a little bit before you, and we sat in a dark hotel room because I don't know, it was just we wanted to have the film have impact, and we stood there and we put it in front of you, and you cried. I mean, it was like it was real. It was real, and we kind of did our little huddle and said, we're going to go talk to everybody and see how this goes.
Yeah.
What's coming up for you?
I remember thinking, y'all have lost your damn minds. Like it was so, I was not prepared for how big that was. I was fine talking about my past, my history. I was fine. On the inside, we did panels. I'd talked about a lot of things. And I think going to Denver was, it felt big, and I think I didn't realize until that video, like people are about to know a lot, and I didn't. I don't think I would have signed up if I realized that it was going to be that significant. I don't think I was ready for that, and at that point, it was too important to back out of, and I have such a history of backing out. I just quit everything, and so it wasn't an option, like logistically, and also just personally, I didn't want to do that. But I it was emotional. Yeah, it was uncomfortable. It wasn't like I don't know. It just felt massive. It felt like a big deal. I also, I remember Elam and I were talking about this in the room and stuff. Like we felt really. I don't want to speak for him. I felt really out of a fish out of water, around all these people who've paid all this money to just come to a conference. We didn't belong, so to speak. And I wasn't sure how it would be received. The video was amazing, but there's a difference between seeing people on a screen and having them breathe the same air that you're breathing. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't sure if people would be scared of us, if they would feel dangerous, or if they would feel like we were dangerous. And it was a lot to deal with, because it's unsettling to think that you're going to be vulnerable in front of people who might be scared of you. It's just it's bizarre to explain. And 10 years later, it's actually 9 years later now from that event, it's kind of funny to think about, because I was worried about a lot of stuff that just didn't happen. Wasn't just the entire,
it couldn't be more opposite happened.
Right. Yeah. And the number one memory I think that I have of the whole, there's a lot of good memories from that weekend. There's countless. We could do hours on just how many good memories I have from that. I think the most powerful or even significant memory for me was after the panel. They lined up to the side of the stage to ask questions. I don't know if you remember all that, but the panel was done. We'd talked, we'd cried, we'd done all this stuff. Elam hit me at one point.
I remember that.
I told him, don't ever hit me again. And everybody laughed. So success there. People laughed. And they lined up for questions, and someone asked me a question around parenting. And I thought, first of all, I'm just a kid. I was in my 30s. I wasn't literally a kid. I was 30. I was a week or two shy of my 34th birthday. And I just, and her son, who she was asking a question about, was not that much younger than I was. And I thought, I'm so not qualified for this. But I also thought, I can totally answer this question. And I remember thinking, this is one of the most important moments I've ever had as somebody who's talking, because I could really fuck this up and say something that she will take as the gospel and go try to implement this idea, and it backfire. Like it was scary. And I was also sure that I knew what to say. And it was really bizarre. And there was a lot of that. Afraid to say it, but know that it was right. And that creeps up sometimes now still, just 'cause life, and it's better now. But early on it was like, I don't know about this. I do know, but I don't know. But yeah.
I think that the another place that I could have started to talk about, like, where did this all begin, is when I learned the Enneagram, which was in a parenting class. And I would say the basic foundation of our curriculum it is a lot of what I learned in that first class: how to take emotional responsibility. We had a method called the Gordon method. Thomas Gordon was a colleague of Carl Rogers, and this very, very old method was about really actively listening and trusting ourselves and taking responsibility for our lives. And so much of that just comes up for me as I hear you fielding a parenting question as a formerly incarcerated person at a conference of people who've probably never spoken to somebody who's been in prison before. And you trusted yourself. And so I think what was so powerful about that for me was I still was like, am I going to remember all the stuff about the 5? I was still at that place. And it was the least important thing. The most important thing was there was a container of trust that was so deep between us. And I remember you said, you've got carte blanche, ask me anything.
What you just said is very important, that unless I trust the source of the question, I'm not going to tell you. So there's something about the trust.
Absolutely. And like we've discussed this several times, and Susan has she has a blank check as far as what questions that she asks me in a phone call or whatever, because I know that I know her heart, I know her intent, and that covers everything. And it could be a very personal, very specific question, and you have a very you have the key as far as I go, and the intent matters, and knowing where you're coming from matters, and with you specifically, I know that.
And I appreciate that.
I felt like it was so generous. It gave me such permission. I didn't feel like I had to ask the right question. I knew you would just take whatever I asked, and you did. And you leveled people who were there. People were at the end. I remember we played the film. We were so excited about the film, and then there was a glitch, like it hadn't fully downloaded or something. And it was one of those, oh, shit moments. But it so didn't matter, because we had to start it again, back from the beginning.
Yeah.
And no one moved.
Yeah.
No one got up to leave. No one. It was like minutes. It was a spiritual moment. And then when it was all over, there was just silence. And then there was like a standing ovation for what people had just sort of downloaded. And I remember Klaus, a lot of people probably know Klaus, type 8 from Denmark. I remember him sitting in the front row. I had met him at the
Patio
pre-party.
Yeah, he's the first person I met.
He's sitting in the front row sobbing, face in his hands. And he just came to life after that. So many, I connected with Russ after that, whom of course I knew. And I remember having my forehead to forehead with Russ in an embrace. And I just felt like, oh my God, a lot has my back. It's not any one of us.
Yeah, I remember thinking that it was good that there was not another presentation for very soon after us. There was some time to mingle and hug.
There was
so much
we had to clear the room.
Well, yeah, evenly.
Right. I think if I remember correctly, it was both. It was that we had to clear the room in about half an hour, but it was actually it was a long time that we all sat in that room, and it was like a space. I also remember in that conference, and I don't know if we could ever go back and find all the old footage. I remember we actually interviewed a bunch of people, Enneagram folks, about that presentation. We should probably go find that.
We have that.
If we can find it, we can cut it into this. If we can find it between now and like a week later.
Yeah, it was interesting. And but I'll tell you the funny thing that I remember about that conference. I mean, the presentation was incredible. The container was incredible. People were, really, the energy was awesome and fun. And in a funny way, the thing that like first popped in my mind was at some point to let off steam, you were like, I need to go drive. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'll go with you. And the two of us just drove a big loop around Denver.
Something of the gods. There was somewhere I drove through that had like Lamb of the Gods.
Right, we drove all the way. Did we drive all
What's
the
the
way?
name of that place?
It's Garden of the
Garden of
Gods.
the
Garden of the
Gods.
Gods. I knew it was something to do with gods.
But it's pretty
I don't-
far away. We
Yes.
drove all the way down there and then drove back because we were like, we just got to blow
I
off
gotta
some.
go. I gotta get out of this building
Right.
because I'm about to explode with
Right.
all this pressure.
Right. And it was a pretty far drive, and the two of us just sat with the windshield time and talking.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning. That's like I'm pretty sure that's the first time we'd met. Not that moment, but
Yes.
that weekend.
Yeah.
We'd never hung out
Right.
before then.
And I remember Rick and I went on vacation right after that in Florida, right, with our friends, and we had all these Facebook requests, and people were, and we I don't even know if we had a Facebook page or anything at that point, but we were like, God, something about this is so much bigger than just this one event.
So that was summer of 2013.
Yes.
And what happened in the next and I know there was another conference in 2014 that we went to, another big deal.
Yeah.
But in those 12 months between conferences, what all happened? Everything detailed list right now.
Well, if my memory serves, and my memory is faulty, I believe that Susan taught her first class in Elmwood in 2014, and her first class was in December of 2014. It might have been December of 2013 and January of 2014. I think that
That's
actually
it.
was it.
Yeah.
So January of December of 2013 into January of 2014, and that was the class that had Tom Papa and Alex and Vic, and I mean there was a whole slew of people from that class that really had Bayar had huge impacts.
And being in that facility is where I really began to put together an actual curriculum. I had been teaching the Enneagram in these 16-hour intensives, but we had to start breaking it up into weekly modules. And we didn't use the word module at the time, but we had to start having our own approach. And that took a good couple of years before we could find our way with that. Another thing that was important during that year was I started to want to understand more about incarceration worldwide. And there was a moment where I wanted to go abroad, and I had a trip. I think I was in Denmark and Norway, and maybe that was it. And I remember that Suzanne Dion substitute taught my class with David Daniels, and I don't think either of them ever expected to be in jail. They were sort of like cheering on the sidelines, saying like, "We believe in you." But I was like, "Well, come on in! Like this is great in here. You're gonna love my students." It was a no-brainer to me, and I just remember how impacted by that David was, and how he started to say then the things that I was feeling. So I felt from above, because I put David on such a pedestal, and I still do, that he saw the potential for so much.
I wonder, and this is a little bit of an aside, but I'm curious, what do you get? Are there like certain questions that people ask you before they go in for the first time to teach, that like things that they're, whether it's concerns or curiosities or whatever, are there some standard things that people typically want to be laced up on before they go in?
I don't know that there's a standard set of questions. I can kind of tell people who are more nervous or not. I give people a lot of play-by-play so that I just think more information is better. And I think there's also a part that I withhold, because I don't think you can express how it will feel when you meet human beings who are just like your brother, who are fascinated about the Enneagram and can tell you all these things about themselves using the tool, who are sitting there in stripes or something, orange. And I like people to have that moment where their head is spinning a little bit. I don't want to change that moment. I want people to come in raw, and that's the part that's transformative.
David has one of the greatest quotes, I think, on the topic, and he was sitting right there when he said it.
Chair.
And I will go find it and cut that in if it's okay. But where he says,
I see the future of the Enneagram Prison Project is expanding and being very successful. Treat prisoners just as human beings, not as another class, lower class of citizenship, not as criminals. Yes, people that have committed some crimes, and you treat all human beings with the equalness, with openness.
And it's such a, I'm an ex-con. Like I'm the guy that he's talking about, and it still hit me like, damn, I don't think I've ever done that. And frankly, I've been vocal about this. I still struggle sometimes to see past the crime. It's hard. It's not an easy thing. It's not automatic for a lot of people. So I like that you don't give them a warning. I'm paraphrasing all that you just said. just let it, just go, just jump in.
What was happening for you, Rick, when that class was going on? And what do you remember from that time? Because I remember making the kids lunches and trying to figure out when I could put the class, because I had to get my first grader and I had to get my sixth grader and I had a high schooler starting, and you were working a very intense job. What was happening for you at that time?
I think what was happening for me was I was, with all of the activity and all of the things that were going, whether it happened to be the stuff that I was doing at work or it happened to be all the stuff that was happening in the family, this was just like this added thing. But it brought such life to you. And when you would come back, it would be a touchstone for me. Like, oh, look, there is more to this life than working a high stress job. There is a, you would just come back so lit up. And I remember us sitting around, dinner tables, or after putting the kids to bed, or after the kids would kind of go in different spaces that we would talk, and me catching up with my day was like, yeah, I had a lot of meetings, and then I would turn it to you and say, what happened for you? And you would light up and you would talk all about the things that were happening in the classroom. And so I think I was living a little vicariously.
How much time after that were you no longer living vicariously, as you say?
I started as the executive director in August of 2016.
So it was still a couple of years then.
Yeah.
Like almost a full 2 years.
2 or 3 years, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I may have been carrying you, but I think Vic and Alex were carrying me, because I was so inspired by what I saw. And I was hearing about people, who had spent 26 years behind the walls, who'd been, labeled a career criminal. And I was seeing, especially just at that time, remember when Alex finished the class and he was sent to prison, and I couldn't believe that this person I had completely fallen for, I didn't know if I was going to see again. And I remember just the light in Vic, and seeing how much he was taking on, how quickly he was changing. And I was trying to keep up with, it was blowing my mind. Then what do we do when Vic gets out? Because he can't not be supported. And we didn't know what the hell we were going to do. But I remember that was such a significant year, because I, at the dinner table with my kids and Rick, I'm sure I asked you first, but I said, what do you think about, one of my students that, and I think I just could say Vic at that point, because he was a dinner time name at the table. He's going to come and stay here for a few days. And my kids have been, okay, what,
and
sounds good.
And that was December 24th of 2014. So it was a year later.
Yeah.
So literally you started in December of 2013 with the first classes, and then started doing classes and classes and classes. And then he got out in December of 2014. And I think somewhere in there, there was another conference too, but.
Where did he stay when he was here? Because I don't know if people know this, there's literally a halfway house, as I use the air quotes, which is the coolest name ever for a guest room.
Because it's a little tough shed that is pretty cute in the inside, everyone. It's pretty cute.
It's cozy as hell.
But there's no bathroom.
No bathroom. It's a shed that's been turned into sleeping quarters.
And it's the halfway house, because it's halfway between the house and the chickens.
Yeah. And there's another one that's the hen house, but the halfway house, and there's a sign on it.
Right.
It says halfway house. Did Vic stay
He stayed there.
in the halfway house.
Yeah, he did.
It's the best halfway house ever.
That's Vic's story to tell, but I mean, it was so special that he was willing to trust us, and that he came.
Right.
And that was the beginning of I was like a continuation of something that was a friendship already there, and then he was family.
Yeah, he told that on a previous episode where he got out and actually, kind of like a Hollywood type moment there where he had a choice to make, because you were in the parking lot when he got out and other people were in the parking lot also that he could have gone with. And it was, the fork in the road, metaphor, I suppose, except it was literal. It was, who am I going with?
And the other thing that's cool about that is, remember the $1,000 I got at the conference, the years before, that was just sitting in our bank account. I don't know what I was going to do with that money. And it was from Rick Benson. And Rick was running recovery programs in Arizona at the time. And he really loves the Enneagram, another 8. And he said, when he gave me that check, I'm such a sucker for the 8s. I just really remember him walking up to me and he said, I really love what you're doing. And here's $1,000. Yeah. And I want you to send me one of the men from your program when they get out, and I'll give them a bed and a place to be, and I'll have him, and I would like for him to teach my other residents the Enneagram. And when you're done, I want you to send me another one and send me more. And I was like, okay. And then I thought, I don't know how in the world. And then Vic got out, and I knew that I had a life with 3 little kids, and I didn't want anybody else living with me, not just Vic, but I wasn't up for somebody to move in forever. And I also knew I wanted some place where he was going to be safe. And so Rick and Vic connected, and Rick said, come on over. We got him a ticket to Arizona, and we took him to the airport. I mean, he'd been out a week or so. So brave of Vic. And I remember going through the line, because I all the way as far as I could in security, because I wasn't sure if he'd get through. I didn't know how that all worked. And he didn't have a license. He had a piece of paper. And he's literally about to show his piece of paper. And then I was afraid, are they going to search him? What are they going to do? And I realized, I don't even know if Vic has any money. I was like, Vic, do you have any money? And he's like, no. And I was like, that's how I remember when I was 12 and I was going to Italy for a month with my dad at the airport. He's like, you got any money? I'm like, no. And he's like, gave me some money at the airport. So almost exact same scenario. And I was like, I fiddled in my purse and I had like $50 cash. And I was like, take this. And he just did. And I mean, just the amount of the places of trust. And then he went off and Rick and got him set up in a place, and Vic was stone sober and long since handled that. But then he got himself into a really good job situation for a while. And I started to realize this village aspect of what we were doing. I needed someone else bigger than me, and Rick had something that was really beautiful and needed at the moment.
I can tell you, flying as someone who's been recently released from prison, it's not super comfortable. I flew the day I got out and flew home from Houston. I didn't know that about him not having an ID yet. I use my prison ID to fly. It's at least the Texas ID is. I could still use it to this day if I wanted to. And I didn't know that about the money. That's a fun detail. It's like all the things these tiny little details that I just didn't know.
And also that you and the boys took Vic kick.
It was a Sunday or something, and I was going to go out.
And this week between when he was just out and he was getting his paperwork in order.
His paperwork in order so that he could go to Arizona. And I was going to take the kids golfing at a 9-hole course down in San Jose. And it was my kids, and it was our friend the Roscoff's kids. And I was like, well, Vic, you want to come? And he's like, sure, I guess.
He's so game.
And I'm like, well, and this particular place had just converted. It had golf, but it also had what's called kick golf. So so it had set up these different, other holes on the holes. And so here we are. It's me and Vic, and a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
I mean, it was probably like 5 kids running around a golf course in
Sounds
San
like a
Jose.
Disney movie.
Right. Kicking the balls down the fairways
Yeah.
and trying to kick them into these. It was
Nuts.
Vic it just rolls his eyes when I talk about that.
How have I never heard this story? So how did Vic do?
I think Vic just stopped kicking the ball
Okay.
at some point. He was just like, it was, and in fact, I think I stopped as well because I realized it was just for the kids, and the kids were just having a fun time. So,
And that's the way Vic's always rolled with our family. He's just always like, sure, whatever. And he'll say yes to it. And that's how he's been so beloved.
yeah.
I want to keep going. We have so much more to talk about.
Oh my God.
And I just, unless you're done.
No, we're
but
definitely not done.
We're an hour in, and I just want to make sure that we're okay. Like physically, do you want to stand up, stretch, go, anything? We're
I'm
good
good.
on water. You know, you
I'm
have a
good.
glass of water over there, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So the next conference, there were a few, like the first few years, the conferences all seemed like a big deal. Like Denver was a big deal. The next year was like a big deal. They always felt
Well,
like
the next year, Susan was the EndNote speaker
yeah.
at IEA San Francisco.
What does that mean?
That meant that when you always have a keynote speaker and then you have an EndNote speaker, when the keynote speaker would start the IEA Global Conference off, and then you have all the different
A whole weekend worth of classes,
and everybody would come together for the EndNote.
Yeah.
And so Susan gave an EndNote speech or speaking on that in 2014. So
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. Well, I remember being asked to do it, and I was asked to do it at the conference before, which was with you and Elam that we were just discussing. And it was at the very end of that conference where somebody approached me, and I just burst into tears because it had been such an intense emotional weekend. And I thought, like, really?
Yeah.
And then I thought, yeah, really. And so I remember preparing for it, and Suzanne Dion and I used to sit in one of our hotel beds and go over our notes, and she would be working the slides that we'd created behind me during the presentation, and she always just had a beautiful cadence with that. And I remember practicing and trying to figure out what I wanted to say, and finding some really evocative, provocative things that that were on my heart, and I was scared to go there. And I remember making a choice that I just said, well, here's a limb. I'm going to crawl all the way out on it, and I'm just going to say what's on my heart because it was real. And that's what I remember.
Got me with water in my mouth. What did you talk about?
One of the things I talked about in that EndNote was the influence of Ken Hartman on me. Ken Hartman is someone who I was introduced to when I was trying to figure out who knew how to teach the Enneagram in prison. I was introduced to Diane Pendola, I felt like Diane was the real deal. Type 8, she had she'd written a book, created a program around it, and was delivering it in a women's prison in Chowchilla. And I was so impressed. She's who I first presented with before all the other conferences, and when I met Diane and Lance. And she introduced me to this book called Mother California, A Story of Redemption. It was written by Ken, who was serving a life without the possibility of parole sentence. And he'd been in for something like 30 years at the time. And I read that book, and I read it again and again. And I was, it really blew my mind. I don't read books really front to end, and I don't read them twice. And then I wrote to him, and he wrote back, and I got into this long correspondence with Ken, and all of the things that were happening in me, this quickening that was going on with the project as I was seeing the power of the work was having a lot of impact on me. And I was realizing more and more things about myself, spiritual things about myself, structural things about myself. Defense systems were falling away. I was expanding who I was and who I understood myself to be in the world, in my marriage, as a parent. And I had boundaries. I wasn't disclosing all of this to Ken, but I was unfolding the themes as in our correspondence, and he was having his own process, and he was never supposed to get out. And as I read and reread his book, things were occurring to me. And so I wove that into my EndNote. And it was so important because he was so important to how the work was. And it was complex because Ken was never my student. Ken had his own transformation. It had nothing to do with the Enneagram. And he's still not an Enneagram fan. Or he's not a fan of the Enneagram. It's just not ever been his thing. Yeah. And but it was important to me to put myself in my own EndNote. And part of my ongoing work in my life has been to include myself in the story of what's going on. I think it's really easy to see the beauty in you and all of the students that we get on the inside and all the people that come into EPP. But I continually have to work and remember to include myself. And so standing up and taking up space to do the EndNote as I did and let it have its way with me was significant.
How was it received? I remember I was there, but how did you hear much like beyond that? Like, did people start just like beating down the door, please come speak at our conference or teach at our prison or anything like that? What came after that?
Well, I don't even know what to say here. I'm looking at Rick.
I have some things to say.
Why don't you go first? You always help me find my way back.
Well, I think that it was so up until that point, up until Susan gave that EndNote talk, I think there was things inside the Enneagram community that were coming to life, and I felt like there was, I don't know how to say this, also I'll just say it this way, felt like there was kind of there were two camps, and one of the camps was, what a great place and experiential way that the Enneagram is being brought into the world. And another one was, haven't we heard enough about prison? You've talked about it now for 3 or 4 years. Haven't we heard enough? And so I feel like there was both of those camps were kind of happening, and it was an interesting thing to kind of witness as so I was kind of an outsider in the Enneagram community, but I'd done my own narrative tradition stuff, and I'd gone to a lot of conferences or now at least a couple of conferences, but I was noticing it, and I was like, that's such an interesting.
Would you hear this directly, or would you just hear people talking about it?
I just think that it was just like, it was, I don't know. I'll ask Susan what she thinks if I'm way off base here.
Well, we did hear it directly. We did hear it in a way that was like, so what are you wanting to present, and what's new? And so we were taking, I mean, it was always me, but we were collaborating before I would speak about it. We spoke, we brought in ambassadors, and then we brought in families of the ambassadors, and we brought in
families of people impacted by incarceration.
The whites were so impactful, and Elam's daughter came and spoke, and we started to talk. We started to bring in Jean-Philippe, it was such an expansive idea to know that this vision that started in a little, Texas prison, and then in California, and then enter Jean-Philippe, who was the equivalent of a warden.
He was a warden
at the, I'm trying to think of the name. He was delivering the Enneagram to wardens and above in all of Belgium.
Wardens and staff, right? So I think it was lieutenants and above.
And above. Mm-hmm. And he had a vision to bring the Enneagram to all of corrections, and he wanted to include the detainees, as he called them. I hadn't met Jean-Philippe before, but we talked on Zoom, and then we met in person. And so just the expansion that was possible, these were all of the, future co-presenters that I was doing different conferences with. So in my mind, when we started to hear that, like, well, is this the same theme that you're bringing, kind of the same panel with more formerly incarcerated people? To me, I felt like, people are not understanding that what a vast and overwhelming, epic problem incarceration actually is. And it won't go away by having 3 little presentations. This is like, we had so much more to do.
In the first conference where we were in Denver in 2013, there was a lot of people in there, but there were plenty of empty seats that could have been filled up. And then within a couple of years, there weren't enough seats. There were people just standing around. So clearly people wanted to hear more about it.
Right.
That's part of why I remember hearing like maybe not everybody's such a fan, and thinking, why? It's so many people are gone, and they don't get the freedom to just say, okay, never mind, after a few years. I don't know. I'm glad that got brought up, because I never know how to bring that topic up, but I think it's interesting to talk about and to hear about. And also, did it not go away? That's the wrong phrase, but did people come around and realize that it's actually worth talking about all the time, and it doesn't go away?
I think it's nuanced. I think that there was and I think what was happening actually was the Enneagram community through the IEA was actually shifting, and it was not as insulated as it had once been, and so it was starting to get, and there were folks that were kind of rebelling against that, and it was just an interesting time to have them rebel against that, because there is, like Susan was saying, there's so much to say, and every one of those talks that Susan would give with different people on stage, they were vastly different than the talk that was before it. And yet I would still hear, just as a fly on the wall in different places, it's just, I have 5 different, talks I can go listen to. Enneagram Prison Project. Oh yeah, I already heard that one. Right. So it was kind of like, there was this in the Enneagram, IEA, I'm just going to hear the same spiel again.
But it had a helpful effect on us, because what it did was it compelled me to want to bring more of our curriculum into the presentations to help people to understand what we were doing. And I think people had that question. And so at one conference, we brought in the ACE questionnaire. An adverse childhood experience questionnaire is a big part of how we help people to understand what has happened to us. And so we gave it out, and we gave it out with the holding and the container that we do in the classroom. And we invited people to start to take up this work inside themselves too, and to see the reflection of the people that have been on panel. And it's easy to just listen to a great panel, and it's easy to be impacted from afar. But what we were wanting people to know is we all are in these our own personal prisons in the same exact way. And so it was, like anything, it was productive and it was useful.
Yeah, it was. It definitely, it set some other things in motion, which I think were important things too.
Where did this I don't know if motto is the right word. It's this saying that you said, and it's printed in several places, that we're all in a prison of our own making, and the way that we suffer our personalities is how I don't know if suffer is the right word, but that's the word. Okay. Cause it feels like a suffer for me a lot of times. Where did that come from? Who was that something that just got said and was like, oh, that's gold? Or did you craft it over time?
I knew exactly where it came from. Before I went to Texas, I was in my such anxiety, and I got introduced to a man named Jonathan, who's a beautiful coach. And Jonathan charged a lot to coach people, and I had never had a coach before that. And he, pro bono, just sort of spent a little bit of time with me, and he helped me to sort of harvest what I already knew in order to think about how to go in there. And that was in that first conversation with Jonathan where that came out of that session, and it never left. And so I think I knew very well, I still know today, the the ways I come up against my own structure. And it was so apt that it just stuck.
2013.
I don't think I've ever heard that, actually.
Really?
Really? I didn't know that's what that came from.
Only took 10 years. So 2013 was Denver. 2014 was San Francisco. 2015 was also San Francisco.
That's right, San Francisco as well.
Later in 2015, we left the country in the fall of 2015, and we went to Denmark.
Copenhagen, yeah.
We went to Finland.
I think we went to Finland in a different year, but
That same trip.
was
For
it-
me, yeah. Well, I was there. I don't know if y'all went a different time as well. It was 7 days and one. We had like the house. It's like this big house with a bunch of us, and we
Right.
did the Copenhagen conference, and
that's
then we
right.
went to Finland after that. We went to Helsinki prison, which was wild because I don't think I had ID, and they still let me in.
Right.
I just brain fart and forgot it at the hotel or whatever.
Right.
And that whole trip was there's so many stories from that trip that are fun to talk about. I want to hear what was your experience, either of you.
Well, I think was so significant about being in Finland was the work that Laura Valtonen was doing, and Laura was such a pioneer. I mean, literally, we didn't even have a workbook, and Suzanne and I would be on the probably Skype, right? We didn't even have Zoom. We were just on something with her, giving her just enough curriculum to go into her next week's class. Like, well, this is what we do, and here's some handouts that you can use. And she would go do it, and then we would come back, and I just thought she was so brave and so passionate. She wanted it to be there. And then when we got to come into the prison and see and talk with the students that she had been inspiring and teaching, and then they got to meet you, right? They got to meet Vic, the universality of the system and the universality of the prisons, that the prison system, yes, a lot friendlier for you, but also the same, like this is how we incarcerate human beings, and this is the tool that people need to be able to free themselves, whether or not they're able to get out. That was all coming to life, and the globalness of it. And so I think it's really important to honor pioneers like Laura, who are so willing with so little.
What do you remember?
It's a little bit of a blur. I'm getting my Finlands mixed up,
Yeah.
so I'm trying to remember.
Have you been twice?
Didn't we also, wasn't there also was it both back to back? Was the I'm getting my Finlands mixed up. I'm not sure.
I only got to go once. So if I got a second trip coming my way, then I'm ready to take it. I'm so ready to go back.
I think there was twice, but
And I think the thing that's important to note is that we were able to keep envisioning bigger because of all the day-to-day, week-to-week work that was happening in Elmwood Correctional Facility, and then and people like Dana who would start off like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to do this, but coming in week after week and just being such a fixture of the program before she even got her feet and got her chops to do it. And there was just a lot that was growing. There was a foundation that was supporting what wanted to happen, further abroad.
right. And right there in 2015 was when we started at San Mateo, and I think we've just passed our, I want to say it's like 110th course in San
Good
Mateo.
grief.
San Mateo was really cool.
How did you get into San Mateo? I know the story with Elmwood a little bit. How about San Mateo?
San Mateo happened because of Katie Rosenberg, who's our bookkeeper, and she was coming in and helping us with our books. And Katie is always connected to cool people, and she kept talking about her friend, Sheriff Monks. And she said, you ought to meet my friend Greg Monks. He's doing great work at the prisons and at the jail in San Mateo. And I was like, how do you know? But I'm like going back and forth to Elmwood and got to make dinner. And thank God she's doing the books. And she kept saying it. And then finally she said, you're coming to dinner. And I've invited the Monks.
Yeah.
And so we all showed up, and Greg Monks, I'd never met him. He came in, and he was drinking a beer, and he put it down on the table, and he said, so I'm a 9. And I thought, I like Sheriff Monks.
Yeah.
And what did we talk about at dinner, Rick?
I don't remember.
We talked about the Enneagram. We talked about his jail. I remember.
He talked about the jail that they were building, which is now Maple Street, and that he was He was working on that because there was only at the time McGuire.
Right.
And McGuire was old and falling apart and dirty, and they wanted to have a programming facility, and they were building a state of the art jail, and it wasn't popular because people were thinking, we already have a jail, you want to put more money into this. But Sheriff Monks was in every way that 9. I'm not in touch with him, but so I'm talking about him in the past tense. But at the time when I got to experience him, he had an idea of what it would be like to bring something in that would be for everybody. He did not understand the Enneagram, but he knew enough to know that he was a 9 before we even had dinner. And then he invited me to his office, and I remember talking to Suzanne and Rick like, holy shit, I'm going to see Sheriff Monks. I felt like I was going to see the president. Yeah. And I felt like that because we would go into the building and to go through all the metal detector stuff. And and then it's kind of like his city. It feels like you go up the elevator and there's a whole wall, big long glass walls. Like that's all going to be Sheriff Monks stuff in there. And then, he's in full dress uniform. And I didn't know I was supposed to God, I just hugged him at Katie's house. Like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Right? Shake his hand. I call him Sheriff. I didn't know all the rules, and I was really a little tongue tied, I think. But then when we sat down, he's just normal as can be, and he said, "So can you teach this program in our facility before we come into the new facility?" And I said, "Yes." And that was my big question. Would we get a chance to program? He said, "It feels like when the staff understand what's going on inside the institution, that's what helps. It's like a language. They help start to understand each other. Are you able to also teach our staff?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "It seems to me that the problem that we have when people get out is they don't get out in a place that is, and they come back to the same communities that they left in. And if they don't have any growth or they don't have any understanding, there isn't a way to receive this person. Right. And do you think that you could work with our families in reentry?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And I'm like, oh my God.
And did you have this in place?
No,
when you were saying yes.
None of this. But how
do you so confidently say, yeah, sure, of course?
Because that's the whole end game. That's the whole plan. And that's been the vision from the beginning. I knew we would be able to do that. I didn't know how.
Or the timeline.
Or the timeline. And I remember coming out of that visit and sitting on a little curb in between these two bushes. And I got Suzanne and Rick on the phone, and I said, "He just blew all our dreams. We need bigger ones."
Yeah. That's wild. Do you have a curriculum at that point? Or are you still if you're going to teach next Tuesday, you're planning now for what you're going to teach?
We had, if I remember correctly, we had the Blue Book. And
the Wisdom of the Enneagram.
Wisdom of the Enneagram, yes. And then we also had homework pages for every one of the weeks.
What we had, Clay, was a binder.
Yes.
We had a binder full of all the different handouts. And this is where I want to just say there were many Enneagram teachers who said, whose work I had come across and I had found really useful for myself. And I would reach out to them and say, "I'm teaching in jail. We're putting together a curriculum. Is it okay if I use this?" And I never had anybody say no. So David Daniels was very generous, very, very generous. The Narrative Enneagram was very, very generous. Jerry Wagner, Peter O'Hanrahan. I'm sure I'm going to leave people out. Marion Gilbert.
And of course,
people
Russ.
from the Visual Enneagram, Russ Hudson. Yeah, so I'm never going to be one of those people. I'm never going to write a book like The Wisdom of the Enneagram. So we had curriculum because we had teaching and we had people who knew that the Enneagram needed to be in more places. And so we had a binder, and each week we're kind of shuffling things. We're making a lot of photocopies. So when we got into San Mateo jail, I remember we would stand in that copy room for so many hours, and then at some point we got cut off, and we're like, okay, because they could see how much paper we were using and ink.
Yeah.
And then we realized we needed a workbook.
So how did that come about? Who was what? How do you put together your own workbook to teach the Enneagram to the incarcerated?
It started off when we would come back from each of our courses each week, and we would write down what did we teach. But I was teaching 6 different classes, so I'd teach 3 or so in Elmwood, and I would teach 2 or 3 or 4 in San Mateo. And then we also were starting in San Quentin. So we would stack our days to go 2 in San Mateo, and then we'd end up in San Quentin at night. And it was impossible to keep track of who was where. So I had little binders and folders of the different students with the rosters. And we would write down sort of the flow of what we covered. And then we started to move around. Well, this is what we covered then. And shouldn't it go before? And then we slowly put together just a rough assembly of those things. And then we realized then it became clear what we were missing. We were missing the introduction. We were missing the division of the different modules. And somebody at one point said to me, it would be great if there was a table of contents. And I looked at him, I thought, yeah, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would be so helpful if somebody would organize that for me.
So who put it together?
Well, starting off when we did that with Suzanne, and then when Robin came in, he brought his beautiful background full of curriculum and design and creativity. And Robin is a creative, and so he brought it to life, put color, put in the modules, made pictures. Robin can, whip up something visually that's compelling in, it feels like, just minutes. Yeah. And that was really, really big. That's when we met Suzanne Gowerluck. People are getting confused with the Suzannes, and welcome to EPP, because there have been more Sues and Susies and Suzannes and Susans than I can shake a stick at. Yeah. Suzanne Gowerluck was really energized by the workbook and has ever since then been somebody who's really followed through with it, making sure that the table of contents got in there, making sure that things made sense, getting all the typos, because there were many. Yeah. Yeah.
Who designed the first cover? Because there's a different cover nowadays than it was originally? Or?
It's a different cover now. Right now the cover is by Roach, and he's one of our students on the inside, and he's a type 4. And we'd asked many different times if people had artwork they wanted to deliver, to contribute. And when he showed up with that beautiful Enneagram, we were all so excited. And we had to get permission. We had his permission. We had to get it from the institution. We had it all ready to go. And then we were still waiting for the institution to give us their permission. When they finally did, we were so excited. We got it off the press. And then we realized, I think was it Helen? Was it Helen?
I don't remember who reminded.
I think it was Helen.
That there was a 6 missing. The 6 was missing.
On the cover.
Just
somehow,
the number 6.
The number 6 was missing on the cover.
And we thought, oh, God. Now that's kind of like one of those rare baseball cards.
Yeah. The misprint.
Yeah, the error. So I guarantee at least a few people heard you say his name and rewound. So did she just say Roach? His name is Roach.
Yeah.
He's an inmate in San Quentin.
Yeah.
And
he's a person. He's a resident at San Quentin.
I said the wrong word.
You said your word, but I'm saying that's the word that I like to say, because I think people
It's not just
forget.
semantics.
It's not. Words matter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he's not just, well, honestly, Clay, you have the right to speak as you do, because you've lived a lot of experience that I haven't lived. So I respect it when you say inmate. But I feel like for me, Roach is just not like anyone. And he has lived through more adverse childhood experiences than most people I've ever read about. And he's still working. I haven't seen Roach since the pandemic, and I miss him. But he's been a big contributor to EPP from the inside.
How long till we get back in after the COVID-related restrictions? Do you know that?
It's on its way.
It's coming.
Yeah, I'm in good correspondence with the institution, with the right people, and now I see that it's on the horizon.
So I asked both of you before we talked, and I think I gave at least a day's notice, if there were any milestones or any moments or anything like that. I bet we've covered a few of them, at least. But I want to pause and say, are there any things that stick out that we've missed so far in the first few years of EPP?
I think that there are angels in the project that we wouldn't have been able to continue the way that we did, acting like a very large nonprofit without. And I think at that conference when we met Lance and Diane, and Lance had just sold his business, and he talked about this, and he, I'm not sure exactly what he said, but when he told the story, but what I remember is being at the party at the last night of the conference, and him saying, "I'd like to have a word with you," and he, I don't remember it being with you. I think it was just me. And he said, I'm in this place, and I'm an investor, and I can really see what you have here. And he shared a little bit about his story. And I realized how this whole inside outside, right? There's a big focus that I had been on the inside really all the way up to the pandemic. Our whole focus had been working with people who were currently incarcerated, but the families and the impact to Lance and Diane and what that had been to live through, I didn't realize that. And there are people who have resources. Lance and Diane are one of them, and they've been significant investors in the project. We have many times not been able to make payroll without them, and so much more. And they're not just that. They're also in our courses, taking all of our public programming. They're also showing up at Reconnecting, which is for people who have were formerly incarcerated and want to come back on a weekly basis. They're sitting in board meetings and inviting us to their home, inviting you to their home. Like they are talk about engagement from a donor. It's just like to use the word donor almost just feels like to diminish what they're actually doing. And actually the donation part has to be said because we would not have subsisted. Rick quit his job and we had no business thinking that was possible, but we both know. And the Meehan's, Tara and Brian Meehan, are on our board and significant investors and donors. And they don't like to say that, and they often go anonymous. But they are what subsidize our passion and our vision.
I forget that aspect of it because for me, I've visited with Lance and Diane a lot. I go to that part of the country. I try to go every year for a big foosball tournament, and then they live very close to that, so I try to add a day on the front or on the back, sometimes both. Or even if it's just like I want to visit. And they're friends. They're like family. And it's I will admit that when you said donor, I felt a little like, wait, like it is what it is. It is, but I feel like that's my people. The story that he told on his episode is funny, where the conversation in Denver, where I guess he was asking about plans or what are your goals or something like that, and it was like, we want to be global. And he says, it's funny to me, but he says, okay, do you have anything smaller than that? It's funny to me. And it's especially because now it's like literally globally. Like we're on all like many continents, not just many.
Go ahead, Rick.
I think the number is now with the different with 9P1K and the programs we've been doing. I want to say it's like 57 or 58 countries. Yeah, it might be greater than 60 now. It's a lot, and
it's not just on the inside. It's right. Prison is our middle name still, and it's the programming is not. You don't have to break a law to qualify for our programming,
right? Which
is cool,
right?
How did that come about? How did it go from something that you could only do on the inside to now it's open to the free world?
Well, that was the silver lining of the pandemic, that we could not program on the inside at all, anywhere. And can you hear my cat purring?
Nope.
Okay, because she's right up in my ear.
Yeah, I see her trying to nibble on your headphones, but no, I couldn't hear.
And so we did just had a moment where I was like, I want to teach. Like, I can't just sit here. And Halita, Rick, and I were sitting there and trying to figure out what to do. And we just decided to do a basic Enneagram class. And we invited a few people close in. It turned into 3 cohorts. That was about 60 people. And we threw the name 9 Prisons, 1 Key on it, which is something that we had been already trademarked and knew was a signature of EPP. And when it was over, we did it again. And we've done it now 7 times. And that's only the first portion of our curriculum. That's just the basic introduction of the Enneagram, that the premise that there's nothing wrong with you, and helping people to fall in love with all 9 types. The second portion of our curriculum is about, you've heard other people on this podcast talk about it. Suzanne did a great job talking about it. And it's the deeper dive to really what happened to you, unpacking your the childhood, and threaded through that is our understanding of object relations and addiction and the brain and what happens and our defense system and the resiliency. and the positive experiences that help us to come out of that. And really, that's the second portion of what we've called Path to Freedom. All of that came about because once we did one part, then we knew we needed the next part. And once we did both of those two classes, something really significant has now happened for the project. And that is that anyone, anywhere who has an internet connection, who is willing to, follow our principles of safety, which is taking emotional responsibility for themselves, and we show people how to do that, anyone can come in and experience our curriculum. And that's been so significant because when people wanted to come into EPP before, we had no way of helping them to acculturate to our way of being. And it is a significant way of being. We really are asking people to best they can to come with their whole selves, to be conscious about themselves. And our curriculum that we teach is also our what supports us in functioning as a aspiring teal organization, helping us to even know how to do that.
There's a lot there. I want to start with the emotional responsibility. You said this phrase, and what is that? Why is it important? Tell me more about that.
In our curriculum, we use that very simple model of above and below the line to ask people if they're willing to take 100% emotional responsibility, which is something Rick and I learned in therapy.
Right, with Leanne McWaters.
Thank you, Leanne. She had literally donated that to the project. And I went in first. I was looking for a therapist. I'd fired 3. I was very unhappy. I sat on her couch and she asked me, "Are you willing to take 100% emotional responsibility?" And I thought, what the hell? I'm paying you.
Yeah.
Of course I'm willing. And I was until like 4 sessions later, where she got me to bring Rick in, and she asked him the same question. And I realized, I was willing to take 100% emotional responsibility until Rick was a total jerk, and then everything I felt was Rick's fault. And that's when she brought me back to the form that I had signed, and realized that how convenient that was, that if Rick wasn't the way I wanted him to be, then I didn't have to be responsible for anything, any of my anger, any of my frustration, any of my judgment. And I did not like that. And then I knew I had the right therapist because now I was in the work.
How does that still show up? Do you still have to remind yourself? Or
No,
is it...
we have a flawless marriage, right?
Yeah, cool.
In fact, I can't think of the last time I've had any sort of reactivity.
Right.
I don't think people realize how damn funny Susan is. I don't think that is twice today. Those were like, that's hilarious. Something else earlier today was really funny. And I wish I got to see more of that. You're hilarious.
Aw,
you're really funny.
High praise.
Yeah. It's funny. No, I just, the thing from it, we can cut this out, but I got to get it out of my head or it won't leave. I just threw it on the ground.
That's good old fashioned Coleman sarcasm.
It was funny. A ball was dropped. Well, did it slip out? No, I just threw it. That was funny. That was the same style of funny. And then you also mentioned an aspiring teal organization, which I think many people might not understand what that is or what all that entails.
Well, I think did I talk about that at all on my podcast?
Probably.
I think I did.
You did.
But it's so interesting how things are brought into the spaces, certainly into EPP, at a really, really opportune time. And one of the things that also, at the same time that we were going about having this conversation around like how are we going to teach, to the public, the other conversation that was happening was how do you grow community, and how do you change what is what you are wanting from folks as they're coming towards the quote unquote organization, and how do you kind of differentiate, because organizational theory is like, well, we were in a hierarchical structure, right? I'm the executive director. I report to the board. The board has, fiduciary responsibilities. And then you have people underneath the executive director that are fulfilling all these tasks. And I was super, used to that structure. And yet the things that were coming up was like, how do you grow a community that way? Right? Because it's just different. I understand how to grow a company that way, but people are coming forward and they have, passion and skill and they want to be, part of a mission and vision and values. And how do you integrate all of that under these into this hierarchical structure? And then Susan was meeting with somebody and they had given this book to her about reinventing organizations, and we started going through it and she started going through it, and I was like, oh goodness, this is actually a perfect fit for how we actually can live into our values as an entire, organism, if you will, and how to be able to do that across borders and boundaries and hearts, and try to live into something that's different. And so this teal organization piece, the simple soundbite for it is allowing folks to be able to bring their passions and bring their hearts online into something that moves them. And the thing that resonated with me as a 7 is how empowering it is to not have some kind of hierarchical structure that you're reporting to, and that you can actually be free and to explore. That was kind of how my entry point into teal, and it was lovely, and it's really something that we've been over the last couple of years have really been, negotiating and trying to understand more, and the reason why Susan said aspiring teal is good. And it's something that's ever growing and growing within us. So,
and in the last couple of years, we've added a considerable amount of players to the game, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And what was once a few people, you mentioned earlier talking about watching the video in the hotel room in Denver, and there were 4 or 5 of us maybe, and that felt like a crowded room, not in a bad way, but it's just like. We're a team, kind of thing. And now it's
can't get us in a room.
Literally. I don't think they would. Yeah, literally. So first of all, do we know a number, like how many, everything from staff, faculty, guides, apprentices, all the different things that exist inside of EPP?
I think that we have north of 300 people in that have Enneagram Prison Project email addresses. That's an easy one.
We have about 1,000 people in Slack.
Yeah.
We have 7 paid staff for Enneagram Prison Project. We have 12 ambassadors.
Yeah, I mean, there's the numbers they're always in flux, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
How
had
do
to
you
do
count?
this. I had to do this thing for Laura, who was Laura Hooper, who was as a program manager, guide.
She did a podcast.
All kinds of things. But she just wrote with this one quick little note to me. It was like, hey, how many? And then Halita followed up just a couple of days ago. How many guides and apprentices do we have? And I was like, goodness gracious. How about if I just say 50 plus?
Yeah.
And then when we get
technically true.
Right, and then when we get to 100 plus, I'll say 100 plus.
And I think the growth in guides came from the pandemic, because when we finally laid out the curriculum, everybody could take in the experience of the curriculum, and then we rebuilt the guide training program to be all online and not over at 1440, not in person. And
not at Vallombrosa.
Not in person anywhere, because that's not how the world was working. And so last year for the guide training program, we accepted 50 applications, which was the most we'd ever trained before. Last year was 12. And it took 6 faculty to train 12 people in person. And we were hauling people up and down the peninsula into our facilities, into San Quentin, which was magical. And honestly, I hope it can come back that way again in the future somehow. But it wasn't the way we were going to scale. And now we have so many guides in training in different stages of their apprentices, apprenticing in 9 Prisons, 1 Key, apprenticing in Path to Freedom, apprenticing in a virtual in-custody program, apprenticing in an in-person in-custody program. And so it is really hard to count who's at what stage and how are we going. But we do know it's going well, and we do know that people are taking, the guides are some of the most equipped people to be evangelizers, if you will, for our work and our program, because they know that the curriculum so well inside themselves. They've really done that work, and they can speak to it. They can articulate it, which is hard to do. It's hard to share what the Enneagram is, and that's starting to happen. People are in their own local, community, and they know the chief of police there. They know the, someone who's been incarcerated there. They're connected to the reconnecting program, reentry programs, and they're able to start bringing it to places that we Rick and I would never meet here in Los Gatos, California.
Hey everybody, it's Clay, and we want to pause here to take a quick break and share with you this episode's Words of Appreciation. Now, if you didn't know, Words of Appreciation is a segment that we began to implement starting with the previous episode, the one before this one, and it was inspired by Jason White. And when I say that it was inspired by Jason White, I don't mean that it was his idea. I don't mean that he said, hey, you should do this thing. What I mean is, Jason is so helpful. He's just a valuable soul within the project. If you want to hear more about him, go to the previous episode and listen about halfway through the episode, and we talk more about him. So now, this is the thing we're going to do. We're just going to pick someone in the project, and I've already collected words from people, other guides and other students and other ambassadors and just different people in EPP. And for this episode, we're going to share our words of appreciation for Susan Olesek. Now, if you're listening to this, there's a fair chance that you know who Susan is, but just in case you don't, I'll tell you. Susan founded EPP 10 years ago, actually. That's what we're celebrating here in this episode. And she began teaching in prison even a couple years before that. So for a dozen years now, she has been a shining light. I'll just summarize by saying that. In a world where it's so desperately needed, she has absolutely been a shining light. So I messaged, 10 or 15 people, and I said, hey, what 3 words come to mind when you think of Susan Olesek and your experiences with her? I'm going to read a collection of those words now. Acceptance, amazing, angelic, calm, caring, compassionate, compelling, delightful, direct, energetic, expansion, exploration, extraordinary, fierce, idealist, funny, gentle, growth, healing, heartful, hope, inclusive, inner light reflect, inspirational, witness, inspiring, kind, love, masterful, passionate, poignant, present, pure, sincere, unconditional love. And one final word, so I didn't save it for last, it's just at the end of the alphabet. Under V for visionary. Susan Olesek is absolutely a visionary. And I'm comfortable saying that without her, none of this EPP stuff even happens. So to you, Susan, we say collectively that we love you, we thank you, and we appreciate you. I want to pull something up that I saw on Facebook. It's a post from 2014, which is 8 years ago, and it says, it's a picture of a bunch of files and there's a banner, EPP banner in the back. And it says, rolling up our collective sleeves and getting ready for the first EPP summit. And that was here at your house. Do you remember what the first EPP summit was? I don't have a super clear memory of that.
Well, it was a bunch of folks, some local, some not, who really were excited about what we were up to and were willing to first drive up the mountain and second spend the whole day talking about it, and then took our collaboration out into some next steps. And it was our attempt to breathe into something more collective and bigger, broadening the vision. What do you remember?
That's a good recollection. I remember everyone upstairs. I remember whiteboards. I remember conversations around EPP as the name, Enneagram Prison Project is the name. Yeah, it was a collective in-breath.
What kind of conversations were there about the name? Like, what were there? Was it ever going to be maybe something different, or did other people have ideas and they like?
I think that the consensus was that Enneagram Prison Project was the name we were going to go with, but there were lots of ideas that people were throwing around. The reason why I think Enneagram Prison Project stuck was that it was super descriptive. Enneagram Prison Project. And so there were some things that were thrown out that were less specific, and though they might have sounded a little, more esoteric or, freedom-y and whatever, it just didn't.
Freedom-y, like that was the word was in the name, like it was General Freedom Organization.
Like imagine a name that doesn't that could be applied, but doesn't have the
word Enneagram
or an Enneagram in it.
Yeah.
Might not even have the word prison in it.
Okay.
And we just kicked it around for so long, and when we landed for good, because we wanted the name to say exactly what we do, which it does, and it has been a great decision. I think that there have been many times I've been at conferences that are not Enneagram conferences wearing a badge that says Enneagram Prison Project, and I've been walking across the street and had people literally pull me back to their side saying, tell me what you do. Because if anybody understands the Enneagram and they see the word prison with it, they get it. They get something.
Or even if they're into if it's not an Enneagram community, it's a prison related thing. And I'm wondering what's the Enneagram? Like, how does that relate to prison? Because I went to prison. I don't remember that or whatever. Right. Why project instead of Enneagram Prison Organization or Enneagram Prison School or anything like that? What's so significant about the word project?
I don't think that was as significant as the first two words, honestly, but it did roll off the tongue and It worked.
Right. And then quickly from that, we got to EPP. And so
I don't remember calling us EPP. I remember people calling us EPP, and then that did stick. Yeah. So I mean, we definitely put the three letters together. We knew that was an eventuality, but it was quick.
I've also heard some people say the, and some people don't say the. So Enneagram Prison Project. Some people say the Enneagram Prison Project. You mentioned last night when we were talking about the paperwork that got stamped, and that the was, you mentioned that the was in there. So not that it's super important, but once and for all, like, what is it? Is the is there on paper, but is it significant, or does it really matter? Is it just like,
well, it is on there. It is on there on the paper. And I think our colloquial, affectionate use, we dropped the.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So where shall we pick back up today? Last night we went through the first few years, even before EPP began, and talked about your first visits in prison. We talked about quite a few conferences and other things that happened. And I feel like we left off in the 2015, 2016 ish kind of range. Yeah. So where's a good place to get back started today?
2015 is a good time.
Okay.
Susan had been in at Elmwood and started at San Mateo. By the time 2015 rolls around, Vic had gotten out. There was the end note had happened. In 2015 was there was a lot of, you used the word quickening last time. There was a lot of things that were starting to come together in 2015.
One thing that has been a thread that from the beginning was the involvement of Russ Hudson. And it's significant because Russ is a, like David, major developer, contributor to the Enneagram and the world system, the way that we understand the Enneagram in the world. And it was significant because of how Russ personally endorsed and embraced what we were up to. And we invited him into our programs in the county jails and also into San Quentin. And he was an unequivocal yes. And, Russ is a lot of different places. He always made time. It's not convenient to go into an institution.
Yeah.
And there were times I remember vividly how we brought Russ into Elmwood Correctional Facility, and it was so exciting. And we had the whole day mapped out, and we were in multiple classes that day. We were trying to share him so that lots of the students would get to experience Russ. And we got to the lobby, and he didn't have clearance. And we were like, oh, no. And that was not the first time any of us had gotten to the gate and couldn't get in. It was often a glitch. I don't remember actually what that glitch was, if it was on our side or the facility side. Could have been either. And Russ, I just remember him sitting there in the lobby seats watching whatever drivel was on TV. And he said, and he didn't have his phone on him. I think he had to wait there an hour, and he couldn't have been kinder or more pleasant or more understanding. And then when he did get in, he just dropped right into wherever the class was. And he's always been that way. He's always just been one of us, hashtag flexibility, and doing what he could do, which was sometimes nothing. But wait.
So what, if you remember, what was that, his first time going in, were you in the middle of like a several week curriculum where you were talking about this part of the curriculum, or was it like a general presentation to, because I know sometimes like for new classes, there's like this, a general presentation about who we are and what we do.
Yeah, no, we were in the middle of our regular programs, and we had multiple classes at about the same time, but they didn't always start and end at the same time. And he came into M4C, which is where I met Renee. And I'd be curious to ask Renee if he was there when Russ came. I don't remember.
Yeah.
And I remember when Russ introduced what we call now Mr. Crumple. And Russ just had a stick figure drawn on a piece of paper, and he talked about how there's a divine spark in all of us, and that we're pure and whole, how we come. And he was sort of playing with the little guy, that he was the little baby that was on his piece of paper. And then he started to talk about how we have things that happen to us, and the people that we want to see us don't see us in exactly the way that we want to. And sometimes we come home from school and there's no one there. And he took the piece of paper, and when he said, and there's no one there, he made a little crumple. And then he continued to talk about different adversities that happen to us, things where big traumas, little traumas, things that affected our psyche and hurt our hearts. And he continued to crumple the paper until it was just a little ball. And I was standing behind Russ. I'd never seen him do this exercise before, but I was watching people riveted and so transfixed by the content of what he was sharing. And really, they were in those, all of us were in those crumples that he was making. And when he got to the ball, you could feel the weight and the heaviness in the room. And Russ knew he had us literally in the palm of his hand. Yeah. And he knew where he was going with that exercise. And he began to open it up. And he said, when you start to do this inner work, you unwind these things. And we realize that, there's wrinkles now on us, and there's things that we don't look the same. And he began to continue to unfold the paper. But when we open it all the way back up, we're still in there. That divine spark is still there. And it was such a beautiful, simple illustration. And we harvested that teaching, and we began to use it. And we use it in all of our classes now. And when we talk about the divine spark, and he just always has had a spirit of generosity about whatever he brought in. He left with the women, the men, our students, us in our curriculum. He's not attached to anything, it feels like. And it's something that I think Russ's involvement has said to, in both directions, to the Enneagram community, this project matters, and to EPP, your work matters to the Enneagram world, right? Or did I just say the same thing? But it felt like there was a reciprocity he was translating in his formidable presence.
With Mr. Crumple, you said that was the first time you had seen him do that. And I wonder, maybe you know the answer to this, but I would like to ask him if none of us do. Is that something that he had done previously, or did he come up with that on the fly?
He'd done it before.
Okay.
He said he had done it before. Yeah.
What were some takeaways? As I talked about Russ's first experience going on the inside when we chatted back in episode 5. And so I've heard a lot of what it was like for him going in and all that stuff. Do you remember much about that day? Like after, like there's this thing that happens when people go in for the first time, and then you're on the inside, then you get out, later that day, you go have dinner, you go hang out, you do whatever. Was there anything memorable, conversations or takeaways from after the fact, or like debriefing or anything like that?
I don't know if Russ said this one on the podcast, but he came into San Quentin. He'd been in many times, so I can't remember if this was that first visit or not. But going in the first time, he met with our class that was meeting in a closet of a classroom. There were 40 men or so in that room, and it was tiny, and it had an entrance that went into the main prison, but it also had an entrance that was like the back door of a stage in the chapel. And sometimes during our class, men would come through our classroom for costume changes. I mean, it was one of the hardest rooms to be in. And he just rolled with all of that when we were in there. He came in and he spoke about mercy, and he spoke with just such tenderness. And I think the men really knew who had been there and who they were being taught by, not only because we had built him up and talked about him, but because of what he transmitted in that way. And so we got to take a picture with that class that's very special, and it's on my bulletin board. And we had a long drive. It was a Friday night at that time when we were teaching. Friday night at 3 from San Quentin to all the way down to Los Gatos could be a 3-hour drive. And I was really wanting to get on the road because I know that drive and minutes matter. And I forgot to point out the bathroom for Russ on the way out the door. and we just had such a chuckle because I felt like my father for poor Russ as we were driving down when I was little. We would say, Dad, can you stop? And he'd be like, one more exit. So Russ was about to pop by the time we got to our restaurant in Los Gatos. That is what comes to mind when you talk about the conversation.
That's funny. And there are restrooms when you go on the inside, but it's a very permission-based situation. You don't just get up and walk out the way that you would, out here in the free world. And I've been there, so I know it's not always comfortable to just step out and use a restroom while you're on the inside of a prison. That's funny. What is it like to have? So Russ is kind of a big deal in the Enneagram world, and I think the world of him. Even outside of that, he's my buddy. I think very highly of him as a friend. But what does it mean to have someone like that kind of just co-sign for this project that you founded so many years ago?
I think it means a lot on different levels. For me personally, it has been a very deep validation of what has been on my heart. And it's not insignificant. I feel myself to be visionary for this project. I obviously founded it, see it. I still see it. And yet there are some people who I have admired who have not resonated with it and have not done what Russ has done. And he has just always seen it. So I have a lot of teachers, a lot of Enneagram teachers. When Russ teaches, I am really moved. When we are looking at our work in the Human Potentialists, when we started to work with instincts, there are a lot of different perspectives out there, and we decided to go with one approach to keep it clear, to keep it cohesive, and his work works. And so I'm not sure how to. Yeah, I don't have a good transition for this one. I have to edit that part out.
I have something.
Transitions are as they are.
I think the other part that is really clear for me is such a generosity of spirit, a willingness to be present to what is coming up on the inside as well as in the project. saying yes to so many different things. I mean, I remember we can talk about Susan doing a TEDx talk in New York, which was about 2015. We stayed at Russ's apartment. He wasn't even there, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're in town. He's not there, and he's like, "Oh, you can just stay in my apartment." And again, just generosity that is, it's just been so. Yeah, just generosity of spirit, and all the things. I mean, we've done so many different parts with Esalen and bringing folks around, and it's been lovely to be in the work with him. That's just a little bit of my perspective.
So there in 2015, 2016, moving forward, what is the next? What's the next thing on the EPP timeline there that's worth stopping at, visiting, mentioning, talking about?
Well, Susan's TEDx talk was kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
I never remember if it was 2016 or 2015 or whatever, but I'm sure I will at some point. We can find that out.
Yeah.
And that was her going to New York and on the campus, New York University, and doing the TEDx talk. And she killed it.
Yeah.
And put a lot of herself into that space. And I really think that the fact that she had done the EndNote before, really, for me, as I was kind of watching her blossom, I was like, oh, this is like the next thing where, one followed the other. I don't know. What was it like for you?
It was terrifying. It was a really big deal. It was again, one of those absolutely yes and oh my God, all in the same breath.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be a big thing. I knew I really wanted to do well at it. And it was really hard to pick who to speak to as an exemplar. There were two that I had in that talk. And in the end, we needed to edit it down for time. And speaking about John, he has been such a precious student. It was easy to include John. John was super generous with his story, and communicating with him to get that permission was difficult because he was on the inside. And trying to figure out how to write that so that we could include everything that needed to be included. We hoped that it would be widely watched and circulated, and that it would be able to say all the things, all the elements of what we were up to. And I feel like we accomplished that. But it was a labor of love. And I was really grateful to be asked and to be included. And then when we had to do a practice, and it was about a week before the actual event. And I had been, I drove all over Hell's Half Acre all the time. I was just constantly saying that out loud so I could have it down. And it was 18 minutes long. So it was a lot of content. And I remember at the practice when we were on with the producers, and I couldn't get through it without sobbing. And I think they were sweating it, because it's not powerful if I couldn't hold it together.
Right.
And but I really lost it. And that's an interesting thing for me with my writing, because I hadn't been saying it. I had been saying it, and I had, written it, but I hadn't delivered it to another human being. So when that happened, Suzanne Dion was supporting me in a big way. And we just said, well, we'll be okay. We'll be okay. And the other thing that was significant is they really wanted less visuals. And I want to just give a huge shout out to Suzanne Dion, because she is such a talented artist, and she had created so much great artwork for that. And she just said, nope, we've got this art, and it needs to be in there. Not all of it, but a lot of it did. And I think if you watch it now, the visuals that are in there are very powerful, and they do thread through the whole thing. And when I actually did do it, there was a moment, and you can hear it in the talk, where I really had to swallow and try to keep it together. And that was the same place I broke down, and I did not want to miss the opportunity to do right by John, by this project. I wanted to hold it. And I felt like it, again, it was another just significant moment. Like you say, Rick, something was birthed through at that moment, at that point.
What was the big deal with the visuals? Did they add time, or did they just make it more difficult?
They asked for 10. I think we had 100. So I think we ended up down to like 45 or some other number. We just had so many.
Were they the ones having to click through it, or was Suzanne doing that?
No, Suzanne did that on the background.
I don't understand why they cared.
I think it was just what they had in mind, and in the end, they didn't mind. They were able to be flexible, and I was glad about that.
So what came from that? It was a big deal, as you said, Rick. What was the aftermath or the aftermaths following that TED Talk?
Well, I think that the first thing was that a lot of the things that Susan said in that TED Talk, she hadn't said before. She'd said them around the edges. She'd spoken of them, but all of a sudden it was like front and center, and it was on a platform that could easily be shared and easily be witnessed. It was witnessed in person by lots of folks that were there in New York. And so the things that were said all of a sudden had life to them. And there was a propelling, kind of a momentum type thing. And because she had weaved not only her own personal story and some other personal stories into it, but also weaved the intention of Enneagram Prison Project through the whole thing, it became quite easy for people to pick up the energy of what it was that we were doing without having to, it wasn't a brochure, it wasn't a website, it was hey, go take a look at this. And I know it's 18 minutes long, but when you're finished with the 18 minutes, you'll get a good idea of what it is that we stand for and what we're doing.
And short writing is hard writing. We had to really hone our message in that talk. And I hope what comes through is what became clear to us is that we were not just talking about social justice or fighting against things. We were talking about having a system of caring, about really having compassion for the lack of holding and what happened to people in childhood. That is the signature of what Enneagram Prison Project's curriculum is all about, that there's nothing wrong with any of us. And that if we can have some appreciation of what happened first, we would have a better way of healing in the actual institutions. And that was what we were experiencing. That's what we were resonating with, what was happening in Europe. And that's what we were envisioning to propel the project forward. So we got really clear on our message.
Yeah. And I don't know where, I think it was just after that, or maybe it was just a little bit before that we got to know Gabor. So, and I think that's kind of another interesting point. So.
Well, we were big fans, and we kind of stalked him.
Yeah. Who is he, by the way?
Gabor Mate is a Canadian-Hungarian physician who works out of Canada, an expert in addiction and the author of many incredible books in the realm of hungry ghosts. And he had such a compassionate approach to addiction. When we got the grant in Santa Clara, we were required to have an approach to working with addiction that we didn't really have. We would say things like, we're all fiercely addicted to our personality, which is true, but we didn't have an approach that was grounded in something. And we looked to Gabor's work, and we realized that he was saying the same things that we were saying, but in his own way. He was saying, it's not actually about the addiction, it's about the things that happened, the pain, and what happened to you, and people trying to medicate themselves with a substance or with a behavior to create the dopamine. And we started to understand, wow, this is such an important part of how people are able to self-regulate or not, and how we're able to have compassion for ourselves. So we wrote to him in Canada. He wrote back. We went to a workshop he was doing in Toronto. We invited him to dinner. He said yes. We couldn't really get over it. We brought him a T-shirt, a Wisdom of the Enneagram book, and we invited him to understand our curriculum, what we were up to. He was adorable and and interested.
Yeah.
And he really didn't understand the Enneagram, but he could understand the way we were explaining it to him. And the overlaps to his approach and ours were just very clear. And then we invited him to be on our advisory board. He wanted to know what that involved. And we said what it is, which is we would like your support and understanding as we work in this space, especially around addiction. And he said yes from the beginning.
He's a radical dude, by the way. And I mean that in the best possible way. He doesn't have like a traditional philosophy towards addiction. I think that's been my experience, at least. And he has, there's a quote by him that has helped me see addiction, and specifically like substance addictions, differently than I ever had previously, because I didn't have experience with drugs or alcohol or anything like that. My issues were different. And his quote is that addiction is not the problem, and addiction is the attempt to solve the problem. And the first time I heard that, the first thing I thought was, you're tripping. Like, addiction is clearly like a problem. Like, I didn't fully understand until I thought on it for a second. And then I'm so glad I heard that, because it reframes, for me at least, it gives me an opportunity to see differently how someone is struggling with whatever substance that they're struggling with. And that, okay, it's not green lighting, meth. It's not saying meth is okay, but it's saying differently what the real problem is, and that meth is the attempt to solve a different problem that exists. And I think I thought that was wild. And the more I chewed on it, the more it just made sense. And I think radical can be scary sometimes, or at least for me, because I'm not comfortable with it always. And I'm glad that I got to meet him and chat with him and hear him speak. We went into prison together at San Quentin. I heard him a little bit there. He's not a normal dude.
Well, he would be probably honored to hear you say that, because he resonated with type 4 whenever we've been working with the Enneagram. And, 4s are a bit radical, and they're not trying to say the popular thing. We needed a radical approach to be able to de-shame addiction.
Yeah. And
that's what it does. His approach, his compassionate approach, helps people to understand that there's nothing wrong with them. And and that's not enough. The approach is useful. When Gabor came in, and that roundtable that you were part of when we were in San Quentin, we sat in a circle, as we want to always try to do. And I was sitting next to Gabor in the middle of the circle, and circles don't have an end, but on the opposite side of it, somebody started just a check-in, which is what we always do. And people were checking in with, where are you, above or below the line? And, where are you right now? And every single person brought gratitude to be able to be in that room, because it was a real privilege. It was special. It was videoed, and there was a lot of love in the house, and people could feel it. So people were honoring the project, and a lot of people were honoring me, because I've been their teacher for a long time. But there were a lot of us. And by the time it got to Gabor, he checked in, and he said, I gotta say, I'm kind of like, why the hell is everybody so grateful about Susan? Well, what about me? Or he said something like that. Yeah. And I think that's where he had everybody, because that's the 4, naming the real thing. And he did that just beautifully. And I think the rawness of Gabor, there was another town hall that we did that people can see when he has an exchange with Jeff Limon. And Jeff, who is a shining ambassador, had been through so much work with us and had done, had been so many speaking engagements and panels. And Gabor questioned him about his happy childhood, and he got underneath something that Jeff had previously not seen. And he really has a way of just being on that edge and saying the most provocative thing. Mm-hmm. And that's what this project needs. That works.
You mentioned that it was a requirement to have the curriculum directly address addiction by, and I don't remember the facility that you said, or maybe that's a California thing in general. What is that, and what's the what and what's the why?
Well, I don't know if it was a requirement as much as it was that as soon as we were getting in there to do work it was in Santa Clara, and we've been doing it now for a while. There was a grant, and it's like, okay, time to step up our game a little bit, and get a little more of a. We had a curriculum, we'd had a syllabus, we'd had all these different pieces, and then it's like, let's integrate more.
It wasn't, maybe a requirement is the wrong word, but 92% of the people in that facility are in for drug-related offenses. So we knew that in order to get funding, we were going to have a solution to address the problem that the residents were dealing with.
Right.
And for those who might not know, when you say 92%, it's not directly that they were selling or that they were doing something that was, it could be they were stealing to support a habit, or they were doing this to support that, or they were involved in distribution or whatever. But all basic, not 92% isn't everybody, but basically everybody is there that related to something to do with substance.
And when we really got down to it and we did start to connect the curriculum like that, we realized how apt it was that actually all of us are addicted to something. And when the personality is not cutting it, we still want to feel okay inside of ourselves. So we reach for something else that does take the edge off. And just like personality or substance or process addiction, it does take the edge off, but then we're still left with ourselves. So it really worked.
I feel like you were about to say something.
I wasn't. I was
okay.
just appreciating Susan.
Yeah, I have the pleasure of it's only audio, so nobody else gets to watch. But you two are sitting. You mentioned this last night on the love seat, and I'm kind of like across the room a little bit, like a few feet, and I get to face both of you, and so I'm seeing founder of EPP on this side, executive director here, but I also see husband. You're not the husband, but husband and wife, and I love to watch the taps on the shoulder and just like the non-verbal and the things that people won't hear. So I just want to call that out. The amount of love that I see between you two it's inspiring, and I think it's fucking cool. There's no other description for that. I think for me, it's really beautiful to see that there's this going back and forth between talking about, the project and all the things that the structural part of what the organization is or the project is, and but then there's also like these little loving things that are just happening. And it's pretty cool. And I'm glad I get to see it. And I'm glad I'm not a couple thousand miles away on a screen watching it. Cause honestly, if we were doing it that way, you'd be on this end of the house and he'd be on that end of the house. So this is a very, this is nice.
Thank you for naming it, Clay. And I'll say, we joked, but you don't know the backstory to this love seat. And that is, I think it was 20 or so years ago. We were in a different house, and we had a sitting room part of our bedroom, and I wanted to get a chair for it. And so we went shopping for one, and I really wanted to get a chair and a half, which is like a big chair for one person. And Rick was like, "But how about a love seat?" Yeah. We talked a lot of smack about that. We joked, and we ended up with the love seat. And what do you want to say? I think that was what I wanted at the time, and that's what Rick wanted at the time. Sort of sums up a lot of kind of how we are. And Rick wanted something where we could huddle in together. And I was at that time kind of a lone ranger. Like I wanted my own little spot. And I don't know what happened to that chair and a half. It's gone, but the love seat has remained. And I do sit. This is my corner in the house. But I think the thing I want to note for the project is that it would have been an impossibility to build EPP without you. That we have such a perfect complement of skill sets and desires and things, stuff that you know how to do, I will never know, and vice versa. And oftentimes we don't want to do what the other person is doing. And I feel like that's why so much of this works. We care so much about each other. We care so deeply about this work. And we also really have worked hard in our marriage to be married. And I know that comes out a lot in copy and different podcasts and all of that. And we just hearken back to it because it's true and it's real, that trying to stay present to the hard things like raising young children and staying in jobs that we don't like and being able to make ends meet when our passions are in a nonprofit and all those things. It's been a joy and it's been a labor of love. And I'm really happy to be sharing the love seed.
Thank you, Susan.
This is where you tell us to take a breath, I feel like, often.
Well, thank you, Clay. Let's do that.
So, in the curriculum, when we start talking about addiction, I want to go back to Dr. Monte and his contribution to what we do. Did you notice? Well, first of all, just to be clear, was there a point where the curriculum didn't have that and now you just put a whole new piece in, or was it there and you just expanded on it? What was it like adding, when you met Dr. Monte and all that came from that, adding that into the curriculum?
There were pieces and it was gradual. And as we added one piece, we realized that it needed more context with other pieces. For example, when you start to talk about addiction, we need to talk about attachment and how the basic, building blocks of personality come from our childhood. And if we don't have a attuned, loving, present caretaker to see us, to help us to feel our own worth, our own dignity, then we start to shut down to who we really are. And when we shut down, we still want to feel good. So that is the beginning of the actual personality. And when that's not working, there's something else. So then we put that context in there. And then we started to talk about people who don't have attachment and what does that look like? And so even after we put in addiction and we started to talk about the brain and attachment and what happens on the inside and how the brain, not getting what it wants and needs, that's the effects of neglect. We did that for a while. And then there was a moment where I reached out to Gabor and we had been looking at the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, the ACE questionnaire. And I asked him what he thought about putting it into the curriculum, and he had no hesitation. He said, it's a great idea. Of course, you'll need holding around it, but it helps people to understand in a very quick way, helps them to not negotiate the actual things that occurred and the impact of them. So I think that was sort of the end cap of what we were adding. And once we had that, we realized we had something quite solid that worked. And it didn't just work in prison. It also worked when we piloted in Los Gatos High School, for example. And so it felt to me like that approach rounded out what we were doing in prison. And it also was a nice segue into the next population that we were heading into, which was the general public.
So how exactly, I actually forgot about when you went to the high school. And I think, from my perspective, I learned the Enneagram in prison. I met most of the people, at least early on. I knew a lot of people who knew the Enneagram from prison. And funny is not the word, but it's interesting to me to think of this, like what I considered a prison program. And now you're talking to high school students. How do you make that transition? And I know there's a lot of overlap between the pain of being a prison inmate and the pain of being like a high school student. Yeah, I was miserable both times, by the way, when I was each of those. And so I know there's probably a lot that can cross over, but surely there's some things that are inappropriate for that population that might, I don't know, is that true even? How do you go from a prison program, and how do you tailor it for a high school student without watering it down so much and making it into fucking Barney and Friends or whatever?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, it was a grand experiment. We had that same question. We wondered, a lot of people had been asking us, this program and the curriculum could go here, it could go there. What do you think? And we absolutely had intentions of ending up there, but the opportunity in the high school was the first one we had, and we didn't know. So I had been going in as a volunteer. My kids were there, and they never wanted me to be in their classrooms, but I got to be friends with Tiffany Ham, who is an angel on the inside of another institution. This one happened to be a public high school. Yeah. And she loved the Enneagram, and she always welcomed me into her classroom. And the kids always understood exactly what we were talking about. And the graduating seniors who were using the Enneagram, she also had her kids do write their own TED Talk. She played mine, and then I came in and I talked with them, and then they wrote their own life story or life purpose. And then the graduating seniors who were 18 got to come into San Quentin on a field trip. And so that was the sort of runway that we paved for coming in to actually do a pilot. And there was just it was so crystal clear that this was going to be impactful, that this work belonged together, that the school to prison pipeline was something that we could start to understand by being in a school. And so we just started a lot of the same ways that we just started in Belgium. And we didn't really have a file on it. We had a workbook, we had a thumbs up, and we got a grant from the town that paid us to take about 220 juniors and seniors. And so we took 6 classes.
You said high school field trip into prison. And that's normal for us. And I promise somebody heard that and go, wait, what? Maybe even rewinded it to see if they actually heard that. And I know you clarified that those who are 18, because that's just how old you have to be to go into jail voluntarily. You can go at any age otherwise. But what the field trip to prison sounds pretty wild, especially taking in a bunch of, teenagers. What was that like? That's what I want to hear about.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't like anything else. I would say that. I had a sneak preview because I have my 2 oldest kids had been coming into San Quentin a couple of times before with me through the project, that had been volunteering to do different things. And I had experienced them just seeing it through their eyes and then hearing them on the car ride home. And then that really came into our dinner table conversations. I knew it was very impactful. I also knew it was okay. And I had been teaching in San Quentin for years. The men in blue were so respectful, so honoring of anyone that came in. And they absolutely fell off their chairs when they found out that I had brought my own children in. And they...
It's unusual, to say the least, by the way. People don't do that.
Yeah. Not everybody gets to experience what happens in San Quentin and other institutions too. It's not only there, but that was where we had access. And so I knew it was going to be magic. And this is a classic example of following the green lights, because all we did was put it out as an offering. We had Steve Emmerich inside of San Quentin, who was another angel on the inside, who was the community resource manager, and everything was on the up and up. Everybody had to be cleared. They all had to follow the dress code. A lot of them didn't, and then couldn't. I'll tell you about that. And then so we had to have a whole bona fide visit, and it was a lot of coordination, a lot of license numbers and getting that. And I know it's hard enough to get kids to turn in their homework assignments, never mind that kind of security clearance. But they did. And on the day of, they all showed up in their cars, dressed all in black, because we said, you can't wear these 7 colors, so you might as well just wear black.
That's a real thing, by the way.
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Inevitably, some kids showed up in shorts. That wasn't going to be okay. Or sweatpants, no sweatpants, no denim. And for high schoolers, that's like, well, what else is there?
Yeah. And it's not just a matter of look the part. You can't wear anything that they might be wearing on the inside, because things happen.
Yeah.
And you can't come out with those clothes, because theoretically, if I went in with blue jeans or whatever, or if I went in with something that they couldn't wear, I could swap with them, wear out their clothes, and now they have street clothes, which is obviously not something you want for someone who's incarcerated, if you're worried about not letting them out or something like that. So
And you can tell people that till you're blue in the face, but some people, it just doesn't compute.
Right.
And then inevitably people end up in the parking lot wearing the wrong thing. And I think it was Aaron West who actually drove to Target, bought somebody another pair of pants or a different shirt or something, and came back. And we really worked hard to get everyone in because we knew how special it was going to be. What do you remember about that part?
I just remember, I mean, it happened, I think it was 2 or 3 times where this end of year thing happened. And the other thing I think is important to note is that no one visits our program as a visitor. Everyone is a participant. So that's a clearly stated thing. If you're coming to any program, whether it happens to be in San Quentin or any other place that we're doing this, you are going to be asked questions, and you're going to be put on panel, and you're going to be part of the class.
You're not just in an audience watching a show.
Right. It's not that at all.
In fact, they were on the panel.
Right. And there were some of the kids in every one of the things that sat on panel, and the panel was made up of San Quentin folks and high school kids. And the questions were not, they were not softball questions. They were questions about, hey, what's it like to be your particular type? And what are some of the challenges of your particular type? And tell
me about the prison made for you in childhood.
Right. And the lovely, the thing that's magic about it is just to have people's eyes just go wide as people start to recognize the humanity of the exercise, and that the questions and the answers, are so similar, and they see each other in each other. It's really magic, and the other thing that's interesting about the San Quentin setup, at least for the ones when the 18-year-olds were coming in, was that in that particular room, there was about 60 men, and they all sit in a circle. So it's a pretty big circle. And so imagine, 40, 50, 60 men plus 20 high school kids, plus some chaperones, plus guides, plus it's a big old circle, huge room. But everybody can see everybody. There's nobody hiding back in the back row. It's just one big circle. And then when we do a panel, the circle becomes a half circle, and the panel is at the front. There's a front.
Yeah. So when you have, I have so many questions about I wish I could talk to some of I say kids, but young adults who went, maybe one day. I wonder, I'll just throw out a bunch of things that I wonder, and you can pick whichever. Were there some who were excited and then got there and then were suddenly like afraid, or was there no fear, or were there, anything to that side? And also, how much does a high school student, a young adult, how much do they you mentioned there was a lot of similarities between the answers given, regardless if it was one of the students or one of the residents. Yeah. And I wonder when I was in high school, I couldn't have answered as honestly as I can now about some things. And part of that was because I didn't want you to know. And then the other part was I didn't know. So there are things that I can tell you now about myself currently, or as myself as a child, that I couldn't articulate when I was a high school student. So how does that look in your experience with working with the high school students when they're paneling or whatever?
Well, I think they had a little warm up because they've been working with the Enneagram for the year, and they really love it. And their textbook is the same textbook, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, and that book is a good one. So people really were already in their classroom on a panel, already had been self-disclosing, had written their TED Talk. They were in the curriculum too, and that's why I think it wasn't as, I don't know what to do with this question. They knew what the currency was in the room, was to be able to drop in and be okay with not knowing and do your best. So I remember one panel in particular, or it was a 2-panel, and I think there was only 1-2 that I recall from that class. And she was tiny, and she was flanked by 2 other, so the panel of 5, 2 other men on either side of her, and she was right in the middle. And so we had the questions, and we're trying to bring out, first of all, what's beautiful about the type, and that's the hardest question to answer. And so you have two men on either side of her talking about, that twos are here to come to teach the rest of us about love. And they're giving real life examples about how that's true for them. And we want people to be able to answer that. And then they're also talking about, how do you get in trouble with your personality? And oftentimes people take that answer and they talk about what landed them in that institution. Right. And so somebody was in for murder, and he's talking about that. And then it comes to her. And she has definitely never heard that kind of answer before, or maybe entertained those exact questions. But what she did was get really flustered and not really have quite the thing. And they stayed present to her. The whole room was a container for her. That's how we teach and how we roll. But in particular, her compadres that were in it with her stayed very available, and you don't need words to be able to convey that. And she got to a deeper answer inside of herself. And as she came off that panel, she was just in a flush of just kind of elated at just what she just experienced, and it doesn't really even matter the details. And that was the way that everybody kind of moved through the room. It was only 2-hour class. We break it up in dyad exercises. Usually when we teach the type 2s, we ask people to sit and turn knee to knee to the person opposite them and not say anything, but to just make eye contact for 2 minutes. And think about that. How much can transpire, and how much presence, as Russ, I love to quote him, who asked us this a long time ago, how much presence can you tolerate? And so when we actually collected ourselves and we got out of the room and we're going all the way out, we sort of rode a wave of wow. And it went all the way out into the parking lot. I want to answer something though that you asked about, because I don't think there was anybody, none of the kids were like, oh, I'm not going in. Nobody was chickening out. Everybody was really wanting to be there. There were people that just didn't show, and they had whatever, high school happens, right? Yeah. And they had conflicts that came up. But when they heard the report the next day from the other kids, they were like, damn, I can't believe I missed that. Yeah. I will say there were probably a few parents that had some concerns. Right. They had to obviously sign a permission slip, and we were coming out of the classroom. This long walk from the class to the one of the clearance checkpoints at a gate, and then you go through something that's called a Sally Port, which has a big gate, and then you enter into the in-between space. There's another gate, so you're sort of like in this between holding space, and everybody has to show their ID. And so there's a lot of us. You can probably have 30 people in that Sally Port. It's a very big one, but the gates are no joke, and they clang. And so we've already gone in through this, and now we're coming out through it.
Kind of medieval. It feels very old and loud and aggressive. Right. The doors.
Yeah, it's big. And as we're in there, we're all holding up our IDs, and the CEO who's behind the glass said, "Is Emma with you? Do we have an Emma Jones?" I can't remember the person's actual name. And I'm like, what is going on? No one ever talks to us in there. We only ever show our IDs and we go in or out. I've never stopped in all the years I've gone through. And one of the students is like, yeah, that's me. And I'm thinking, oh no, what happened?
You don't get to leave. I'm sorry. You messed up.
And he says to her, your dad is on the phone. And he picks up the phone. No joke. It's got like a cord on it. And he takes it through looks like those mail, like you're at a gas station, little metal drawer that comes out. I didn't even know there was one. Like he puts it through the thing and she takes it back out. She picks it up and she goes, "Hi, Dad. No, I'm in San Quentin." And he just wanted to track her down.
No, he says, "No, I told Mom." That was the quote that I was like, I told Mom.
That's I would love to hear the rest of that story, because
I'm sure there was a part 2 to that story that we never got a hold of, but that was the intro.
That was the most trouble anybody got into in San Quentin.
I'd be terrified if I was going through the Sally Port and doing we're especially on the way out, and they were wanting to ask, "Is Clay Tumey? Clay Tumey, are you here?" Like, no, he's not.
There was one other time like that I got a call when I was at the Hoover Dam from Steve Emmerich, and Steve never ever called me. I didn't think he even had my phone number, and it was because one of us had taken our brown cards out and not given it back at the door like we're supposed to, and those things never leave. So That was you don't often get stopped. If you get stopped, it's because
Yeah.
they have a question.
What is a brown card?
It's like a passport. It lets you get in and out of San Quentin. That shows that you're a volunteer with clearance so that you don't have to get re-cleared every time. You can have it for a year, a couple of years.
Yeah.
And trained.
Yeah, it's not just, hey, can I have one? It's you get certified, you go through, I don't know the process. I don't have one. I don't even know if I can get one. Can I as a felon? I don't know what the process is, but it's not just like a regular, thing, right?
You're basically that particular thing says you're a volunteer with this organization, but actually you're more than a volunteer. You're actually in charge of your volunteers.
Right.
So you're going to be bringing other volunteers in, and you're in charge of them. And if, so you need to know all the rules, and you need to, be, and if anything happens, it's on you as the brown card holder.
So one more question quick about the high school program, and then we can move forward. Is that something that stuck around? Did we do a second, third, fourth?
We weren't able to finish our pilot because of the pandemic. So we stopped in March of 2020. And then we actually just were awarded a grant to go back into Los Gatos High School in 2022-23 to pilot our program again. And we're now in the process of looking at, is that a hybrid in 9P1K? What will that look like? So we're really excited to be back, and we're going to do that again in the same social justice English class.
I didn't know that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, really cool.
So in the next school year.
That's right. For the whole year.
For the whole year. And that'll be weekly?
It'll be weekly for 2 classes.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Anything we want to say there before we move forward?
Well, I just want to say it's interesting because the way that actually that came about is the way that lots of things come about, which is somebody, in this case it was Susan. This is the same thing that happened in Elmwood. Susan volunteers somewhere, and then at some point, and then it gets to a certain critical mass, and then people are like, let's do it for more people. Let's do it for more, and then so it goes from 2 classes for a couple years, and then it's like 220 kids, right? And so now with 220 kids, you have to have 4 or 5 guides to go do that. The same thing the same thing happened in Elmwood. When we were in Elmwood, Susan went and she volunteered there for a couple years before we actually got a grant to be able to do. And it wasn't just Susan. Susan did it for a while, and then Suzanne, and David Daniels, and it was again, this whole, that's just kind of the way. It's been the way.
How do you get a grant? What's the process for that? To get funding to do these programs in either jails or high schools or wherever?
So there's so many different ways. Usually what that is, it's all about is it's, someone is saying that we have some amount of money to put towards some set of programs. And so then you have to say, does my particular program meet these particular requirements? And then to be able to describe that in a way that the people who are awarding it say, yes, we want you. And the things that they look at are does the program meet their needs? But the other thing they look at is like, what kind of organization are you? What have you done in the past? What would you say
you do here?
Right. What are your bona fides? What says how can I, there's a lot of CYA stuff in there too. Right. It's like, how can I feel comfortable signing off on this?
So just to reset, the point of the podcast is to tell the story of EPP, and it's been 10 years in the making officially today on April 12th, or whenever this goes up. We're actually at the end of March when we're talking. And we've covered a lot. What have we missed? I mean, we've gotten all the way up to the pandemic a little bit. Are there any pieces along the way that we haven't covered, or any questions that we might not have answered?
I think there are 2 big things that happened that I would love to just reflect on. One of them is the IEA conference in Cincinnati, and the other one is the IEA conference in Oakland, because those were really the first 2 conferences, or the first times when we actually brought a lot of people to a conference, and it became a place for us to to be in community with each other, as well as to be in community with the larger Enneagram community.
Which one was first?
Cincinnati was first.
That was in 2016, 17,
18.
18.
Yeah,
That's why you have the list, because
So I can sound
it's
smart.
2018,
Unless I read the wrong
and
thing.
Oakland was 2019.
Yeah.
And it was both of those were big deals for the community, for the organization as a whole, because we traveled with a lot of folks. And
put a number on that. When you say a lot of folks, are we talking half a dozen, 10, 11? I was there, so
I think the number, I think we had, when we were gathering in Cincinnati, I think we had like 25 or 30 people that went to the conference.
Wow.
And then when we went to Oakland, it was a lot more, because there was just, we were in our backyard.
Right.
So lots of people were able to come. And in the Oakland thing, we also did the Blue Bottle event afterwards, and then went and did a huge symposium thing at San Quentin. And that was a big thing that happened after the conference. So those were two big, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that there was a really lovely, thing that lots of people have reflected on, where we met up on a patio in Oakland and spent hours just in community. So
that's my I'll say my second favorite memory of any conference, and possibly anything EPP related, was the patio of it. So it was the Saturday night party where everybody does, all that, except me. I don't do that. And I actually went and just sat down, and somebody came and sat down with me, and then somebody else, and then somebody else, and then somebody, and then hours later, there was, 30 people out there probably. Yeah. There was the whole patio at this hotel was all our people, couches, whatever.
Couches, fires.
Yeah.
Plenty of refreshments.
It was so cool. And it was so late into the night of just talking and sharing, and nothing formal. There was no director saying that this is what we do next. We were just hanging out, having a good time, and just saying stuff that was important to us. And
yeah,
there was tons of laughs. There were tons of tears, and it was a good memory.
Yeah. And I think that was one of those places where we started to recognize or realize that actually we're not growing an organization. It might have, we might be saying that we're growing a 501c3 organization, but we're not actually growing an organization. We're actually growing a community. We're part of a community. And there's a difference. So,
I always would say that a little differently, which is that EPP is growing all of us.
That's true too. Yeah.
What is the difference between organization and community?
Flippin' knew you were going to ask that question. I think that organization is, let me just kind of reflect here. I think that organization has a structure that feels, we can all fall into a structure that we understand with regards to an organization or a corporation or something where we're like, I play a role, or I have a small part or something like that. But when you start talking about a community has really connection at its core, and and this concept of, we've been playing around with this concept for the last couple of years as we've been going through, the teal stuff, is this being and doing, and how in an organization there's so much where you focus on the doing, and in a community there's really like a lovely focus on the being. Doesn't mean that things don't need to get done. It just means that they get done through the being, to quote Halida.
The doing does get done and through the being. That's truth.
Right. And I think that there's this other part, which is like, it actually there's like a higher order to this, where when, of course, class courses and, classes are important. All these things that we're doing are important. They're important because they're ways in which we're in the world and doing the work that we're supposed to be doing. And the people that the people that we're doing it with, we're enjoying that part. It's this enjoy the ride kind of thing. And it's so lovely to be in spaces where you're like, oh, I love the people that I get to be in spaces with and be in the work with. I love them, and I love being in those spaces. And so there's a respect and a compassion for everyone that we get to be. And I think that it comes back for me to that patio. It's like, oh, that's right. We really, really love each other and want to be in the space together. And we don't want to go to bed, even if it's 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. We don't want to. Some people peeled off because they started falling asleep on the patio. But that's
actually true.
I think that the makeup and the high functioning of our board of directors is really noteworthy. And we are tiny. We're only a board of 5. And Eric's been with us the longest, I guess, next to me. And I really enjoyed listening to his podcast. I enjoyed the way that he came in was because of our connection and because of our understanding as parents, right? Our parenting is in the curriculum. Our parenting is in the bones of ultimately how all this stuff works and gets worked out. And we've grown very in tiny increments, but with big leaps when we think about the people that have come in. And each new board member has brought so much to the project. And we are at this place where we just we don't want to change a really good thing. But the addition of Alex Senegal to the board really it did a number of things. And I think as soon as it happened, we all wished it had happened many years sooner, but I don't know that it could have. And I think that Alex, first of all, Alex saying yes, because it is a choice to take up the invitation to become a member of the board of directors. He hadn't been on a board before and didn't know what that entailed. And I would like to hear Alex share what that was like for him. I fell in love with Alex as a human being when I met him when he was in Elmwood Correctional Facility. And I already mentioned in here how he was sent to prison. And actually, after Vic got out, I asked him to help me find Alex, and he did, because he's always been that kind of special soul. He's always been someone who really was a fixture of this project, even when he was on the inside of our community. And he had to do a lot to find his way back after escaping a life sentence, honestly, and finding his way all the way back into the world. And by the time he came onto the board, it represented how solid he was inside of himself, how much this work works, how much he this is what I want to say. It filled a place that was a massive gap. It was a lot like Sue Lambert coming into the faculty. It was a place where we started to see how much leadership mattered to the people who are the heart of our project. We say often that the ambassadors are the heart of EPP. And there was a question that we had on a town hall many years ago where someone had asked this question I saw coming, and I knew I didn't have a very good answer to the question, but I was going to answer the question anyway. And the question was, how do you empower people of color to have leadership roles within the organization? And I fumbled a little bit with the question. I talked about how we aspire to have people on the inside come out and train with us and become guides and go back in. But I didn't have a clear pathway in my mind, and I didn't have a good answer to the question. I invited an ambassador. I invited Renee to speak to it. He also sort of stumbled with the question. I took it back, and then later we got a lovely, and I do mean that, we got a really thoughtful email from the person who posed the question saying how the lovely Susan Olesek, and then she used this word, microaggression, and how I asked an ambassador to answer this question that I didn't have an answer for. And it really gave me pause. It made me wonder why I didn't have a good answer in the first place. And I wanted to go get a good answer, not so that I would have it, but because so that we would be it. And I also wasn't about to go rushing to put people in leadership roles. We're an aspiring teal organization. We actually don't have a lot of hierarchies, but there are some natural ones in the board as a function. So when Alex said yes, it helped me to realize how much representation of the ambassadors at the board level had always been missing. Like when Sue came onto faculty, and every time there was a discussion and Sue was now in the room, we could realize that ambassadors weren't going to be missed. Therefore, what we say we value wouldn't get omitted. And it was just until we had that happen, the other things in the organization that are now happening were also missing. In other words, now we've because of these two very important leaders in our organization who we met on the inside, now we try to have an ambassador in as many meetings as we possibly can. We try to have ambassadors as much as we can in our public programming. We try to have ambassadors in the main room of A Path to Freedom. We do bring the ambassadors into our guide training program, because there's something that you can say, Clay, that nobody else can say unless they've lived through incarceration. So I just feel a lot of gratitude for Alex for being willing to be patient for us, and also for Alex being patient with himself until he had the readiness to, for all of that to sort of come together.
I am finding over the last couple of years, as we've continued to lean in more and more into bringing ambassadors into different spaces, just this incredible amount of lived experience that gets to be present in all the spaces, and how it's so informative, and it's so it builds on itself. So, because it's so clear when it's not there. And it was something that, as you were saying, Susan, that felt like maybe it wasn't that we didn't have the way to make it happen before, but maybe we did, but certainly when it came alongside of like starting to do the invitations, it was exactly right. And the more that happens, the better, the more grounded the project is. So.
I have this tiny sense of pride that I experience as I hear both of you talk about that as an ambassador myself. Because I'm on a very short list of people who was around 10 years ago. And I can remember, I've talked about this plenty of times, so it's nothing new to hear this, but I remember when there was just a few of us, and I remember thinking, like, what's it going to look like in the future? What's it going to be? How will one become an ambassador in the future, and things like that? And what purpose are we going to serve? Are we going to teach? Are we, there's a lot of like things that we would talk about among the three of us at that time. And, then maybe the four of us or whatever, but it's fun to hear you talk about all the things, Susan, about, faculty and staff and board members and guides and all the different things that ambassadors are a part of now. And you mentioned that any meeting, like it's almost like, and you didn't say this, but this is how it feels, that there's just this open door into practically any conversation where if there's not an ambassador, there's a spot at the table. And it feels like that as an ambassador. I absolutely feel that I'm just welcome everywhere. And I feel, and it's not like a pass, like, oh, there's, you actually give a shit about what I'm saying or my input. And it's not just me. And hearing you talk about, Path to Freedom and 9P1K and the programming, and there's a spot in every week, every class that happens, there's a spot for ambassadors to be in there as exemplars or as whatever. And not only that, but there is an ambassador scheduling that. So like Renee schedules for 9P1K for the ambassadors to be a part of wherever there's a place to plug in an ambassador. And I've been helping with the Path to Freedom. So it's like there's stuff to do, and it's just cool. It's really, it's neat to see. And I don't even know if it's appropriate to say, but I feel like saying it. Like, these are also not just like us volunteering our time. Like, we're being compensated for our time and our energy. And it feels like we don't just have a value in terms of our opinion, but we have a value in terms of the project is giving us money for work that we're doing, which is really cool. And I feel like I just feel very proud to know that is what I'm affiliated with as a person. Like, it's a big deal to me. And Alex is one of my favorite humans on the planet. And we could go for hours about just how amazing I think he is as a person, as a speaker, as a friend, as an ambassador, as all that. And it's neat to see him just kind of thrive. And, from our conversations, he's my buddy. So we've chatted, and I know there's some like technical limitations where when you've been locked up a certain amount of time, computers aren't that easy. And there's some things that you got to work through. And so for some people, and it's not to downgrade other board members at all, but for some people, it's easier to step into that role because of experience, because of expertise, because of whatever. And I don't know that it's always easy for an ambassador to step into a role that might not have been anything that they've done before. And I just have a lot of gratitude and pride and all the happy feels when I think about that stuff, because it's a big damn deal. So I'm happy to see the other ambassadors thrive in what they're doing. And I'm also like, I remember so clearly when it was just a few of us in a hotel room watching a video that was about to be played and thinking like, it's gone from potential to reality. And to me, that's the story of EPP in this first decade. Is I don't think there was a whole lot of doubt, at least not from those who were there among us, that the potential was there, but the potential turning into reality is just cool to see. Like, it's bananas how many people there are. How many people, when we thought that, how can we copy and paste Susan? Like, there's only one Susan. And we've talked about this on plenty of episodes, so it's nothing new that I'm repeating here, that like that was a real concern, and it's not now. And there, how can we copy and paste Dana? Well, there's so many people. There's so many other people who can be themselves, and we don't need another Susan. We don't need another Rick. We don't need another anything. We just need people as they are. And that's what makes the project what it is. That's I can't say how special that is. Pretty cool.
Well, it's a lot of gratitude to you for being willing to stick around, because it's been anything but smooth, right? We haven't had a file on anything that we've created before we got there. And you said yesterday that you have this old story of someone who doesn't stick around, but obviously that's not true. And you did carve a pathway for the others who have also come, alongside, behind you and alongside you, and then have also gone into different places. Like, I'd like to just mention again, thinking about what Sue has done, because we haven't had another female ambassador, and we haven't had another ambassador who has taken up so much of the curriculum and able to teach it. So for Sue to be actually teaching in the institution in which she was formerly incarcerated is magnificent. And not only that, she is apprenticing the majority of the guides who are now going back into that same facility. And she's like, we call her Mama Sue, Grandma Sue, because she's got everybody under her wings, and she's tracking everybody, and she is absolutely lit up and full of joy to be in there, and she's amazing at it. So for that to be a real pathway, I'm actually also very grateful for the question that I got in that town hall that really stopped me in my tracks. Whoever that was, shout out to you. And I can go look you up, I guess, if I find that out. But I also am glad that that's a change that has happened. And I really admire Sue for being that.
I don't want to get to the end, but do we have more I don't want to leave anything out. Like it's a long.
There's a lot of things that will be left out, and I'm sure as we reflect back, there are places that we've been. There are people in Australia and and in Belgium and France and the UK and Canada and all around the US. The whole stuff with Minneapolis or with Shakopee Women's Prison that we haven't really talked about, but it's been on other podcasts and. And Suzanne and Phil, and I mean, there's so many things, right? How do you? I mean, there hasn't been very much talk about Viva, and I mean, there are so many people, and I know that we're going to leave people out, right?
Yeah.
And some of them have had podcasts, like Laura and Robin have had podcasts, and some of them haven't, right? Like Halita, so it's an interesting thing just to know that this is 1 or 2 days worth of discussions around some anecdotes that we can remember and recall for others, and that there's lots of things that were missed and that have other have resonance for others. So,
well, the good news is the podcast does not end here. And originally, I committed to doing a year, and I didn't know that I would want to do it past that originally in the beginning. And it's pretty easy to say that I do want to keep going forward with it. So you mentioned Halita. She will be one of the people that I speak with soon. Don't know when. And hopefully I get, over to the other side of the world and speak with Viva and others that are over there. And maybe one day Australia will let me visit, By the way, I mean the government, not our people.
Right.
Because
exactly.
we know that I have an open door from them, but Australia ironically doesn't let felons into their country. So I poke jokes at that every opportunity I get, and maybe one day I'll be allowed in there. But so we can continue talking about the story of EPP, and we can pause here to celebrate 10 years, and then we can continue in the future to keep telling all those stories. But this has been 3.5 hours worth of dialogue that's been very nice for me. I've enjoyed sitting down to talk with each of you, and thanks for letting me into your home yet again. I have no idea how many times I've been here now. I can tell you there's a guest book out in one of the halfway house or the hen house, I forget which one, where I can say the first time I was here. It's a long time ago, but thanks for having me back to chat with you both. I want to know in as many words as you care to share, what it means to you, Rick, to celebrate 10 years of Enneagram Prison Project.
So, I think one of the things that I've been noticing as we've been going through this pandemic, for sure, is that time seems so elastic, and looking back 10 years to a space where it was an idea and a dream for Susan, and that we were trying to navigate a lot of different personal and and organizational things. It seems a little bit like a blur. We were also at the same time raising children, and and so it was kind of like a blur. But what it means to me, I think, is just that I'm proud of Susan for her vision and the she has borne a very heavy load over those 10 years, and we've talked about so many of the different things to make this a reality, and I'm proud that I've been able to play a part in what wanted to transpire. And Susan mentioned this whole EPP has been growing us. I feel like I am a very different person today than I was 10 years ago. And not just because I have more gray hair. It's because I have been able to, in that decade, experience so much of the people in our community, and the love, and really be able to love myself in a way that that wasn't clear to me at the time. And it's become clearer and clearer as I've kind of moved forward. And so some of that I can put down to, just a little bit more of, me aging, but I feel what it feels like is being in the spaces, the intentional spaces, and being able to really step up into a space where I'm like, I'm holding myself accountable for my own emotional responsibility and my own growth path, has allowed so many things to help happen inside me. So it's been a blur, but I look back and I'm like, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. And the project itself has changed, and has grown, and so have I.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Susan, I'll ask the same of you, but one other also, like question 1A to go with that, because EPP, this was your vision in the beginning. This was your idea. This is what was on your heart. And, we're a decade later into the whole thing. And I don't see any time in the near future at least, that's going to slow down or stop. So I for you too, what does EPP, celebrating 10 years of EPP, mean to you? And also, what is it that you want people to know about Enneagram Prison Project that they might not already know?
For a long time, I don't know when we stopped saying EPP, we're just in the starting blocks. We said that for a long time. And then at some point I stopped saying that because I thought, well, I think we're out of the starting blocks. We're definitely rolling, and EPP is running. There's a lot of EPP that doesn't need me or Rick to run. And that's not to say we're going anywhere. But it's nice to know that things don't need us, because the whole, the vision is really a success when it can go on and on and on. And I think at this point I can say it will, because there are too many other people who are passionate about what we're doing and have the know-how and experience, and everything's all so congealed together that I don't worry about that. I don't. And I feel like there's so much more to do. So I think that this, the thing that people may not know is that for a long time, as I was having a consulting life, doing things as Susan Olesek, I called myself a human potentialist because I do see the human potential, but I was always 150 feet deep inside EPP in the prisons doing all of that. The pandemic has really changed because of all the things that we've talked about. What hasn't changed is our desire to see the Enneagram in more spaces and places. And I feel that the next step for EPP is within the organization of the Human Potentialists, with an S on the end, the plural. And that's a benefit corporation that I founded last year that's now also up and running. And it's like an end cap for what's going on with EPP. It's a way for us to take our compassionate curriculum and have it be infused into healing professions like coaching, like mental health professions, and like facilitators for other organizations that might not ever have this particular program in their fill in the blank. And so we're training guides and coaches and mental health practitioners to be able to have our Enneagram informed approach that was inspired in prison, to take it into markets all over the world. And our vision is to democratize the Enneagram and to connect people to the core of our shared humanity. And when I say that, I mean what we learned in prison with you, what I learned in prison with Alex and with Sue and with Jeff and Renee and all the other ambassadors that have come since then. And I feel that there are places in the world systems that are run by people who have all the privilege and all the power and all the resources that need to, frankly, pay for the program in order to understand the value of what they're getting. And that value, when there's an exchange monetarily like that, and a portion of the proceeds can go back into social justice organizations like EPP, and who will benefit from that and need to. So I feel like that's the full circle that people may not know is also currently happening. And I'm really excited to be seeing that part fill out, because there's nothing like being taught by somebody who got their chops teaching it in prison. And I'm really proud of our guides who can go and do that. I see other coaches have this compassionate approach in their coaching as well. I think there's such a big need. The world is really hurting coming out of this pandemic, and we are not only not done, we see so many more places that this is going to help people to really bridge what we've been seeing for the last decade, of the importance of connecting people from both different communities. And our community weaver, Halida Haddock, has had such a profound influence on how to tie those things up together and see the bigness of that in her 8-way. And I can just feel that that's the momentum that we're riding. So it feels damn good. I got to say that. I am proud of what we've all accomplished together. I'm honored by the ambassadors who said yes on the inside when there was nothing that we could show them, nothing that we could say. We could only share the field of love and hope that was enough, and it has been.
Well, congratulations on 10 years of Enneagram Prison Project. It's been pretty damn good. As the fist bump across the room into each other. And of course, that's going to bring this episode to an end almost. Thank you both again for everything. We'll just say everything.
You know, I've been able to sit with my thoughts a little more about the community stuff that you asked earlier. And I really feel like one of the things that's been really lovely to watch over this last couple years is the interconnectedness of everyone in the organization / community. And I've said this on a couple different calls, but there's this thing that's happening in our teal aspiring organization where it's moving away from a hierarchy, and it's moving away from like a hub and spoke. And it really is more of all these cross connections. And I think that is the thing that there's so much magic there when we get to, when people get to have all of these different relationships, and the relationships don't have to be centered around, a founder or around an executive director or around a board. They can actually be, so spread out, and all of those interconnections actually make the fabric so much stronger. And it's something that's just been sitting with me for so long these last couple of years, as we've been kind of going through the pandemic and going through our public programming and doing all this stuff with having people in different spaces. It's just an important facet that I just want to just call out, and how really that is what EPP is now, is this whole fabric of connections and interconnections. So that's what was on my heart.
It feels like you started off a little bit with the law of 1, and I think I'll end on the law of 7, which is 2 things I've learned about the law of 7 right out of the gate is that nothing happens in a straight line, and nothing stays the same. Things are always changing. And I know that when sometimes that happens over, the law of 7 can refer to something that can happen over just a few seconds or a few decades, and in this case, one whole decade. I can see an arc of different moments, shock points, things that have happened external to us that have called us into ourselves to take a step towards ourselves and to hold presence and not reject the moment, so that we could become something beyond where we were in that moment. And that continues to happen. And I can feel that especially since the pandemic, when we have changed so much about our model and how we operate and how people have been able to be trained and to take this work back out into the world, we're about to see a scaling and an expansion like we've never seen. And I feel so excited about that, like kind of holding hands, all of us, and like, let's just jump and go. And I want to stay so present because I don't want to miss any of it.
He is the person who has put up with me the longest and who has believed in me the most, long before I could ever believe in me. I'd like to thank Barbara Whiteside, who was my first Enneagram teacher, and David Daniels, and Helen Palmer, and Russ Hudson, and Don Riso, and all of those people who just understand long before their students come to them what it is they have a hold of. We have a final word.
I matter. I make a difference. And who I am today is important. Okay? Let's be clear about that. I'm doing well, and I'm doing it the right way. And that's because of a change that happened when I was in prison. Without a doubt, there's somebody there right now. It doesn't matter how they got there. It doesn't matter why they're there. And it doesn't matter how long they're there. They're clueless to who they can become. Clueless. Because it hasn't been brought to them. You have a chance to help that happen. If you're here and you can hear me, this is your opportunity to be a part of something. Don't walk out until you've fulfilled that chance, okay?
And thank you very much for being here today.
For more information about EPP, please visit EnneagramPrisonProject.org. We appreciate your time and attention today. Stay tuned for future episodes, which you can expect on the 12th of every month as we continue to tell the story of Enneagram Prison Project.